historic Phoenician origin that means Western, which does not describe a people by their skin complexion, nor their religious choice, but merely by their geographical location. Interesting enough, which should make you ask some questions. Like, with this author, Philip Hitti, being born in the ancient Phoenician city of what is now known as Lebanon, would he really know the truth? And if so, does that mean that the Phoenicians are in fact the people that will be called Moors by some of you today? And if you didn't already notice, there is no pre-existing records or documentation that indicates some form of a great migrational period of any of these people inhabiting the areas that I just mentioned, immigrating to anywhere throughout the lands now commonly known as America. And with all due respect to the people that still resides in those places today that I mentioned previously, forgive my people, for they did not know how deceitful the indoctrination process of their true identities stretches far beyond their assumptions and misinterpretations that their minds could even imagine.
Are punished today because we help free slaves. Okay? If my tribe never helped to free slaves, they may never would have bothered us. We may never would have bothered us. We may never would have bothered us. We may never would have bothered us. If we would have just continued helping Europeans as they came in, we were fine.
Mr. Roach, how did you happen to come to this place?
Well, I came to Augusta, and I was talking to some people, and they told me to came on down to Waycross, that it was a lot smarter work around Waycross, see?
Well, how many miles have you been traveling looking for work so far?
About 1,600 and something.
Mr. Roach, where did you spend the night last night with your family?
Over in the woods. Put up on the side of the road. I rolled dirt road and slept in the woods outside the car.
If we would have just continued helping Europeans as they came in, we were fine. But when we decided to help the slaves, now we did something wrong.
Aileen King, I saw your children yesterday at the Okeechobee camp. Why didn't you put them in the nursery?
Don't make enough to pay for it.
How much does it cost to put them in?
85 cents.
85 cents.
That's right.
Aileen, what time did you come out the field this morning?
6 o'clock.
What time would you get home?
About 3:30, 4 o'clock.
6 this morning to 4 o'clock this afternoon.
That's right.
How much did you earn?
$1.
$1?
That's right. $1. $1. $1. $1.
So we was watching Dan Calloway video, and sorry, my mic was muted. We was watching Dan Calloway video. He was trying to explain if the Moors, exactly who they were, or if they was a nation. So Dan Calloway was saying when he traced it back to Europe, he said that he found out that it meant like it was showing them the Phoenicians, it was showing them the Persians, it was showing them people of the Middle East. And he was saying there was no proof because the word Moor, as he kept tracing, a Maori meant people from the West. Well, if you remember, and this is why I say that sometimes we can be so educated and so quick to disprove things that we don't need. They're not disproving methods. We actually can show things. Well, what's in the West? Americas. The true West is the Americas, right? So he doesn't realize what he's saying. He's thinking like West Africa. They always told us the whole world was one. So we know for a fact that it was a time where the Atlantic Ocean was more like a river or a great lake than it was an ocean today, because continental drift and landmass that separated these continents apart, we know it's fact because it's still going on today, right? So it's a couple things that what Dane was talking about that I didn't agree with. I didn't know my thing was right. You know what I mean? So I'm just waiting for him to, I don't know if he went off or if he coming back. There we go. I'm a legion. That's what y'all are. You need to deal with his life. If we know who we are.
Throughout today's society of America, the process of education is based solely on the credence to that which is most popular by public opinion, rather than which would be truthful by way of logical and critical thinking. Compulsory school curriculums in history, for example, derives from fabricated folktales that were authorized by manipulative social engineers of the 19th century. And their opinions alone are somehow credible and are unmolestedly deemed as historical facts without being constructively criticized or even publicly challenged for validation and accuracy. It's as if people now concluded that if something can be believed by the masses, then they should just tag along and follow the crowd and believe it too. But how did we, as a people, allow our history to be written solely on the basis of a stranger's opinion or by popular belief? Why would these strangers have a right, or even the knowledge for that matter, to tell the stories of our actual history here in America, when the truth is, those strangers were not living here with our indigenous ancestors to bear witness to any account to begin with? Now, I want you all to think about the very first time that you have ever heard of the term slavery, and try to recall what you were told about the so-called slave ships amongst these slave stories. Many of you can recall hearing information given to you concerning the slave ships themselves, deriving from third-party sources, and maybe not your school initially. But that's very important to note, because we must now ask, where did these third-party sources retrieve their information about the slave ships in general? These third parties are things like books and movies and even the media that tends to give their cultivated possible descriptions of these so-called slave ships based merely on their perception of what they consider to be a fact, based on information taught by a stranger, or rather by someone else's opinion. For example, fictional movies like 12 Years a Slave and Armistead, then the resurfacing of the story surrounding Clotilda, which was allegedly found and deemed as the last American slave ship, just like the Wanderer, which was also deemed as the last American slave ship. But yet, there are no viable remains of either ship or boat, just a story, in order to keep the idealism of slavery afloat. What all of these third-party sources have in common is that their stories tends to lead to a dead end when researching any publicly verifiable evidence to validate their claims made, along with validating their depictions of what a slave ship actually.
We can't hang all of our information and knowledge off of what can all be proven and completely verified, right? Because if we go back to the beginning of the time, there was no written records of this shit. It was oral tradition, right? Sometimes we get so caught up on facts and like, yo, I need to see it in facts. But from the beginning, there was an oral tradition before there ever was a written record, right? So that's another thing that we got to pay attention to. I started to realize that with all of the black scholars, young, old, mental, everybody trying to prove these points so much that they say stuff that I realize that they have no history of what the place they talking about. And I love Dan Calloway, but when he was saying that the Moors, he was trying to say has no connection to America, like Maori is a term that means people of the West. Well, America's in the West, dummy. And then at the same time, and I finally kept myself debunking so many people. And so I start realizing how much they're not researching or they're biased to their research, right? Because when he say Persia, when he say all of these people, I wanted to ask him when he said it earlier, like the Persians, these are not, do you know that the Persians look like people from New Jersey and Philadelphia? So it's a lot of things that I realized, like he went in the dictionary and he used the Old English dictionary. And the Old English dictionary said that the Moors were people from here. But if you use, we know that those dictionaries are slave dictionaries. You got to use law dictionaries. The law dictionaries, and I question everybody. I'm one of the people, I don't believe in all the Moors and all that extra shit for no reason. I'm saying that I know for a fact that there's an influence because if you study law in America, then what you learn is that the law books are written in favor to the Moors, right? They say that the founders of the courtroom, they say that, you can wear the Moorish hat because that hat was invented in the courtroom as well. It's a law hat, right? So it's weird when I see black scholars, and I love Dan Calloway, and I watch all of these documentaries, and I watch all of these people do all this shit. And I spent yesterday on the podcast breaking down and debunking a Mexican guy or a Hispanic guy who, it's like when we dealing with everybody else, they trying to prove that black people or dark-skinned people, if they was on the land, they want to discredit it, right? And what they're saying right now is that movies like Hidden Colors and the history that we got in America, it made everything black. But these people from India that were dark skinned wasn't black. These people from America that wasn't black. These people, right, they wasn't black. But in order for them to educate and build a documentary to educate the minds of people in America, we have to meet the people where they are, right? Because it kills me when I watch all of these fake ass so-called scholar motherfuckers from North Carolina up across the world. They always bring these beautiful YouTube channels, but yet their level of research is baby, right? But if you're gonna say, if I'm gonna bring information to the public and I'm gonna talk about and I'm gonna prove something wrong, and I'm gonna say, well, they wasn't Moors because they gave the reason why they called the Phoenicians the Persians, and this is what he said, but he doesn't know that the Persians, right, the Iraqi people, and all of these are damn near the same people. Like the Persians and in Iraq is the same place, right? He was saying the Phoenicians was this, but Phoenicians were the kids of the Egyptians. They were descendants of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were the descendants of the Chinese black man who mixed with the Nile Valley women who established Egypt. So it's all of this. And it's crazy that every day that I wake up and I watch knowledge and information and hear people break down shit. And that's the issue, the reason why we can't get nowhere, because if everybody trying to debunk, but through everything with the dude yesterday, he's saying that the black people, the dark-skinned people from America that was here, they wasn't Africans. But if you want to use the term African, then you're right by using the term, because the word African isn't a term that people from Africa ever called themselves. So of course, when you say Nubia, Nubia is not the name that the indigenous people called themselves, all that shit. These were names given by scientists for those areas of after we were colonized. That's not the name they called them lands. So the whole ideology of what everybody's expressing through history and shit is really becoming dumb and founded, and wonder why people so fucked up mentally. Because like I wrote on Dan Calloway page, I said, you brilliant, bro, but you clearly ain't read a lot, and you clearly not really doing your research properly, right? Because I seen him when he tracked the slave boats, and he keeps saying like, well, there's no history. There's a lot of shit there's no proof because it's buried in the fucking Vatican or underground in Mount Rushmore, in these areas that we don't have access to, right? So if that's the case, it's a lot of stuff that we ain't gonna have proof of, and it's almost to the point where you just be looking at people like, we always trying to disprove. The question, if we know there were dark-skinned people in Americas already, right? Then when everybody make their points like, oh, these people, they're like the dude said yesterday, they're not, they were here already, they're not from Africa. Any people, when you talk about Africa, we got to remember the whole world was considered one. So when people start making all these arguments and it just become very old and very childish after a while dealing with it. So, and I noticed that when I go around, even when I'm in, whether locally or when I'm traveling, when I sit down and we talking to like these people that's educated, the issue I have with these educated niggas that they not open-minded. They figure that their way is the only way as well. It's like it's not a conversation. And while I be talking to people, I can see the holes and the gaps in their stories from the jump. But I be listening and they be the ones impatient and the ones get rude, and then I gotta really come forth with the information because it's like I was at work this year and it was this black man. Well, I'll call him black as we understand. It was a black man. He was probably like 45. He was a teacher at UNC, right? And so we was talking history, and as we built, they came and got me. So I'm talking about history, and we was talking about, you know, like the law, the Moors, the history of America, just multiple things. So at the end, he was telling me, he was like, yo, he was like, look, bro, he was like, I work at the colleges, and I heard some of this before, but when I dig in the books of the colleges, it ain't there. So he was like, that's how we know it's not true. But the reality of it is that's not completely right. Because like I would tell him, and like I had to tell him, because me and him bumped heads that day, and I ended up saying, you know what, sir? And I just said, I'm going to stop this conversation with you. Because see, it becomes, a lot of people I talk to, it turned into an argument because niggas and black people feel like they got to flex information to try to disprove you because of what they heard or know. Even though most black people and most people I know, whites, black, Hispanics, ain't read no fucking books and did no real research. They just talked to a couple people. They'll sit there and argue you up and fucking down about the information and research that you spent years and years about. Now, if they come in with real information, then we both got to be open-minded. But when people already assume the information they got is all in all, when I know for a fact most people at work all day, most people doing this all day, most people 90% of their day is occupied. So you don't have the time to even do the research or the dig. You just watch documentaries and movies and shit, and then you find your way from there. Because that's what really be happening. You know what I'm saying? So I'm talking to this guy, and he's saying, and I said, think about it, bro. The true history of the Americas, if they're hiding the true shit from Egypt and every other continent in Americas in the Vatican, why would you think that they're going to put it in the colleges, whether if it's D1 or not? You got to dig. You just think and go to the law library in your school. You go to the library in your school and think got everything. That college has very, even though it's a college, it has information, but it's still under the indoctrination of what's going on. And unfortunately, we don't want to listen to it. So that's one of the reasons why we go through so much, and one of the reasons why it becomes such a dead journey and a fucked up struggle when it comes down to us talking about history and with people. You know what I mean? I've talked to so many people. I've talked to black people who was educated. I was like, what the fuck history got to do with now and this, and that? And I just be looking at niggas like, that's why don't nobody want to help y'all. Right? We got all of these people, right? We can't come to a common understanding. And you got black people that's saying, oh, this never existed. This never existed. But like I tell Dan Calloway, I've never seen one of your documentaries where you spoke about the history of America, because law and history go together. So you give a lot of history, but you give no law to back it up, right? Law and history go together. So as much as I love Dan Calloway, he makes a lot of videos, but he gives you sources, like he give you this book from a European, he give you this book from me, he show you these pictures, but he never shows you any law or anything like the founding of the land principles, right? Because when you talk about civilization in Mauritania, when he keeps bringing up these civilizations, I started realizing watching Dan Calloway that he bring up like he bring up like Chief Warhorse, who said that as she's what we call a dark-skinned Indian, she's saying that they was on this land for a long time. But she was saying that when they was helping white people, there was no problem. When they helped the slaves is when they lost their shit. But even, I tell you this, even the American Indians ignorant, even the dark-skinned ones, because even by the time that the Europeans came to America, and mind you, before that, the colonization, they had been traveling with different societies coming over. So that's why there was multiple mixing of different shades as well here already. But the mixing of shit, there's proof and pictures and documented times where Europeans and other cultures came to America before the Portuguese, right? So by the time we get the reason why we got people like the indigenous American who are brown skinned and dark skinned that doesn't identify as what we call Africans or whatever, is because once they got over here, because I showed you in the documentaries yesterday, after a while, just like today, we got grandparents. We don't even know what our grandmother and our great grandmothers and them was on and who they was related to. So if you think about how quickly that is dispersed today, then you got to think about historically when you go back in time and say, we're assuming that every civilization had it all together. No, there were civilizations that had their shit all together in organization and history and writing systems and shit. And there was a lot of high advanced cultures who had no writing, right? But they didn't use writing. They used pictures and hieroglyphs, right? But that's considered a writing system today. But back then it wasn't considered a writing system. So that's why I love when I watch all these videos, I watch people disclaim and this and that. I'm not so focused on personally about trying to prove the Moors in America and all that. Nah, I just know that when most people are just making documentaries or just trying to get a following, I know for a fact what some of this stuff is that they can't understand, because if you don't go and if you don't stand up in court and use this shit from the Moors, or you ain't never been stopped by police or been in places where you use this knowledge to where it gets you in different rooms to get you out of jail, then you would know it. Then of course it has no meaning to you. A guy like Dan Calloway and a lot of educators, they're just reading something. They've never been to the courtroom and used the knowledge. They never stood up against the police officers. I watch YouTube channels and a lot of people give information, but they give the information from their computer, but they ain't never went in the streets and put that work in. That's the difference between the leaders of today and the leaders of the 60s, 70s, 50s, and 40s. In order to be a leader, you had to go put some real work in. You feel me? So that's the issue today. Anybody can get a fucking YouTube channel and anybody can start talking knowledge, even if they don't know shit, but just by playing videos, as we see right here on the screen. And as much as I watch Dave Calloway, he always say there's no evidence and records, but when he said earlier, because I think he lied, that's why I won't allow me to go back. What he said earlier becomes an issue, mainly because when he said like the Moors, they considered people from Persia or people from the Phoenicians or certain people, but my question when he said that, I was like, do you know that Persia in Iraq, he named both of them, but they're the same place. The kingdom of the Persian kingdom, that's not their name. Persia was a name given by scientists, just like Nubia. That's not the name that they called themselves. That's the name the scientists gave to excavated the area. Just like the Olmec, that's not what they called themselves. But I keep saying this to y'all, and people keep just not even really paying attention. I'm trying to get the camera to stop doing that. It's clearly this light here. I'm trying to get my camera to stop jumping back and forth. Okay. But that's exactly what's happening. And we end up getting so sidetracked. Let me grab this, y'all. We end up getting so sidetracked from all of this and his story, and that's why we can't come to conclusion. So, not to jump, but what I was saying earlier, while I'm talking to this guy from the college, he's telling me he can't prove it, but he's rude. So I tell him, like, look, man, I'm at work, so I'd rather not even have this conversation because it ain't going in the right place. I went about my business. So I went to the back. Before they left, they called me back up to the front. His wife, it's a black man, educated. And so they came to the back, and my manager was like, yo, they want you in the front. So I'm like, I'm good. Just let me, you know what I'm saying? But he like, nah, go up there. You know what I'm saying? Talk to him. You're very influential. So I go up there to the front, and I talk to him before he leave. You know what I'm saying? He dabbed me, give me a hug. He like, look, bro, we ain't supposed to be arguing about this. We just trying to find the truth. And I was like, exactly. But I could tell where I heard his pride. And this the reason why somebody like me had to realize that I have a hard time talking to so-called educated niggas with college degrees and shit. Because they got these college degrees, they feel like they better, right? And I'm not knocking them because I'm not saying, I want to make it clear, if you got a college degree, I'm proud of you, right? But when we talk about history and truth, that degree is second tier to what the truth is, because you have to understand that your degree from the institutions come with the colonial education and not completely true history, right? And a lot of people have a hard time accepting that. You know what I'm saying? They have a hard time accepting that basis, that you got a college education. So I was telling him, and I told him, often the most intelligent people who know the most didn't go to college. You know what I'm saying? I told him, like, it's funny because most of the time the people who got the most information are people that even if they went to college, they'll tell you they learned their true knowledge and history outside of the college, because the college is only going to teach you what they want you to know and understand. You know what I'm saying? So that's always been the biggest problem here. But since we're here this morning, I'm going to do my intro because I know I jumped in on the Dan Calloway. And we're going to get this joint going. So good morning, good morning. Good morning to everybody who tapped in. You know what I'm saying? Organic Minds Podcast is trying to get everybody together and continue to dig and uncover the truths and stuff. One of the hardest things to try to figure out, and I've been noticing, is that the problem that we're so divided because we got the Moors, the Hebrew Israelite, the Christians, the Muslims, we got all of this shit. But all of this existed after man's development. Religion came later. So we got to identify with something deeper, right? And that's always been the issue here. So let me get y'all right and let's get to it this morning.
Class dismissed. Mr. Lowe. Tell us about your father.
Why don't you tell us something about your father?
We're trying to get to know each other, Mr. Lowe.
I was trying to get to know you, Mr. Tolson.
Well, I'm not the one on the debate team.
Are we not engaged in a debate right now?
All right. I'll take the affirmative. Take the meanest, most restless nigger. Strip him of his clothes in front of the remaining male niggers, female niggers, and nigger infants. Tar and feather him. Tie each leg to a horse facing in opposite direction, set him on fire, and beat both horses until they tear him apart in front of the male, female, and nigger infants. Bullwhip and beat the remaining nigger males within an inch of their life. Do not kill them, but put the fear of God in them, for they can be useful for future breeding. Anybody know who Willie Lynch was? Anybody? Raise your hand. No one? He was a vicious slave owner in the West Indies. The slave masters in the colony of Virginia were having trouble controlling their slaves, so they sent for Mr. Lynch to teach them his methods. The word lynching came from his last name. His methods were very simple, but they were diabolical. Keep the slave physically strong, but psychologically weak and dependent on the slave master. Keep the body, take the mind. I and every other professor on this campus are here to help you to find, take back, and keep your righteous mind. Because obviously you have lost it. That's all you need to know about me, Mr. Lowe.
Class dismissed.
Class dismissed.
You can only visit each floor one time, though. And each floor you go up, the value increases. You may choose any item from any particular floor, but you cannot. You can go up a floor, but you cannot go back down. There was a woman who went to the husband's store to find herself a husband. On the first floor, the sign on the door read, "These men have jobs." That sounded good. These men have jobs. Floor 2, city. It's called the husband store.
I hate when they do.
And you can go there and shop for.
They'll take something and they'll change everything. I hate when they do that, y'all. Come on. I'm gonna show y'all where I was at.
Anybody heard about the new store in New York City? It's called the husband store. And you can go there and shop for a husband. There's 6 floors in this store. You can only visit each floor one time, though. And each floor you go up, the value increases.
All right, let's go back. I hate when they do that.
It's called the husband store. And you can go there and shop for a husband. There's 6 floors in this store. You can only visit each floor one time, though. And each floor you go up, the value increases. You may choose any item from any particular floor, but you cannot. You can go up a floor, but you cannot go back down. So there was a woman who went to the husband store to find herself a husband. On the first floor, the sign on the door read, "These men have jobs." That sounded good. These men have jobs. Floor 2 says, "These men have jobs and love kids." Floor number 3 said, "These men have jobs, love kids, and are extremely good looking." Wow, she thought, this is sounding pretty good, but I'm compelled to go on to the next floor. Well, she does go to the 4th floor, and the sign reads, "These men have jobs, love kids, are drop dead, good looking, and they help with the housework." Oh, mercy me, she said, I can hardly stand it. Still, she said, I've got to go on. She went to the 5th floor. "These men have jobs, love kids, are drop dead, gorgeous, help with the housework, and have a very strong romantic streak." But she couldn't stand it. She decided she had to just find out what was on floor number 6. Floor number 6 said, "You are visitor 31,456. To this floor, there are no men on this floor. This floor exists solely as proof that women are impossible to please." Anybody heard about the new store in New York City? It's called the husband store. And you can go there and shop for a husband.
I always thought when I seen it, I thought it was so bugged out that she broke it down. But I think on a psychological level, what she's trying to say is that curiosity, the fact of always wanting more, The fact that, and this is the thing that's hurting our community, and just not just us, but the world. The issue is that what she's saying is that when it comes down to a husband store, you can go to this. Each floor was a different level of man. This floor was he had a job. This floor was he had a job and loved kids. Next floor was he had a job, loved kids, and was good looking. And each floor, right? But if you go up a floor, you can't go back down, right? So out of curiosity, to keep seeing what life brings, she keeps going to the next floor to see. What does that tell you psychologically about women, right? So that's why it's so important as men for us that when we have wives and women, to help them ground themselves in understanding and logic, just like how she can help us ground ourselves in our emotions and certain things, if she's on point, just like if he's on point. So the point was, he was saying that all of the women made it to the top floor where there's no men, right? So think about it psychologically, talking about all these women end up being by themselves, right? Or single moms, single parents, and end up never getting married, or end up being single women most of their whole life and leave the earth that way. This is simple. The story was to show you that as a woman, right, the want for curiosity and to want more, or the fact of the constant searching for better, right? Because the first floor, these men got jobs. These men got jobs and love kids. Third floor, these men got jobs, love kids, and extremely good looking. Fourth floor, these men got jobs, have kids, extremely good looking, and they're sweet. These men, right? It gets to the point like they're romantic. At what point do they keep saying, at some point, a woman should know her limits and say, you know what? All I really need to be happy is a man that loves children, in case we have some, a man that works and provides, and an attractive man. That's my standards, right? But remember, you didn't ask for intellect, you didn't ask for reason, none of that. So that's why there's always levels above where you are. There's always levels underneath on multiple levels. That's why you have to be comfortable with you and know where you are in the room, so that you don't underachieve by picking the person under you that's bringing you down, or you don't overseed yourself with picking a person that's so far above you that they're dragging you while they're flying, right? But the point that I got from that was saying that she said, remember, it just said that it's impossible to please a woman, right? In the aspect, if she's searching for happiness outside of herself.
Decided she had to just find out what was on floor number 6. Floor number 6 said, you are visitor 31,456. To this floor, there are no men on this floor. This floor exists solely as proof that women are impossible to please.
And that's super deep when you think about it. And I just wanted to bring that to y'all so that y'all could just see it. Anybody that disagree or got a comment on it, feel free to express how you feel about it and explain why you say what you say, because there's many people around the world that can understand. There's people that's on my page that are educated, that do have understandings, that do have better things. And I don't mean to attack a person with a college degree, but that's the issue. Sometimes the people with college degrees think that the people that's educated, as far as like learning history and really self-taught and building on their own, which I got some college, but also got outside information, that they're threatened by the knowledge, saying, well, you think you better, or you think this and that, you're going to just spit on my shit. No, we're not spitting on it, but at some point you're supposed to realize that you went to school to get that certificate so that you could work in their system, but not use it as a tool that sets you free mentally. Because I don't care how much college degree you got, ain't no true history or no true Black history classes in college in America, because they can't tell you who you are and where you came from. See, that's coming up. So just always remember that, right? Let's drop this. And we're going to get to it. This first part is the study of antiquity.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the study of antiquity and the Middle Ages. As always, I am your host, Nick Barksdale, and today we are joined once again by Dr. Rebecca Futo-Kennedy, who's going to take us through a thought-provoking episode on the term sub-Saharan and the whitewashing of ancient North Africa.
Yeah, so I just think we should sort of like because this idea, this like sort of continually trying to find this idea of, separating out North Africa from sub-Saharan, as if the Sahara was the impermeable boundary that nobody could get through, is really a continually problematic type of argument. Particularly since we have early texts that tell us that, right, Herodotus tells us that, he says the Ethiopians and the Garamantes are indigenous to North Africa, and that, of course, the Phoenicians and the Greeks are not. But he makes it very clear that people they call Ethiopians are indigenous to North Africa and Northwest Africa in particular, right? But they are not sub-Saharan. So I constantly, what is the obsession that people have with this idea of sub-Saharan, that whenever they ask any question, what they're trying to do is prove that sub-Saharan Africans aren't part of the ancient Mediterranean world, which we know is false.
Do you hear her? See, this is what I'm saying. Constantly, even Dane was saying, he was saying Phoenicians, he was saying Persians, he was saying Iraqs, and he was identifying them with different, like, as if they were different from the African. But remember, we saw sub-Sahara means what we call the Middle East. Going into China, the area in between China and Asia, that whole Middle East area, which was considered Africa still. So she's saying she doesn't understand why, when we're dealing with, just to prove it, she says she doesn't understand why whenever people talk about the Nubians or certain peoples, right, or these people, they say that they are not sub-Saharan, meaning that the blacks from the Middle East are different from the blacks from Northwest Africa, from Ghana, those areas, you know what I'm saying? But she's saying, but that's not true at all, and it's been studied and proven. See, I constantly got to go back and reiterate these things to y'all, hopefully that y'all pay attention so that you understand this, right? Because the information's out there. So that's why a lot of people, they're studying ancient history and black knowledge or wherever they're digging, but they're not studying everywhere. You got to dig from theirs, here. You take all the information, right? And that's my question. I've been looking at how people study, but it go back to how they learn how to learn.
Not only do we know, of course, that people that we would call, quote unquote, sub-Saharan Africans ruled Egypt before the Persians got there, among others, but that they have this continual culture that runs up and down the Nile. And we know from our ancient sources that they believed very firmly, and they interacted with what in the area that they called Libya, right? So ancient geography, Herodotus separates. There's a big geographic debate in the 5th century, right? So on the one hand, we have Hecataeus, who has his map of the world, and Herodotus seems to be addressing him and trying to correct him at various points in his history. But there's debate of whether there's one continent or two continents, whether everything west of the Nile is its own continent called Libya, or whether it's not. One of our ancient sources actually has Europe and North Africa as one continent. Yeah, because Libya is the name that he uses for everything west of Africa, essentially, is what Herodotus uses. But it's also used at some points for the entire continent of what we call Africa. Because remember, Africa is a Roman word. It's not a Greek word. They didn't call it Africa. But yeah, this idea that there's a natural impermeable boundary that starts at the Sahara Desert, and that there's no penetration, and that everybody who has quote unquote black skin is below that line historically, and everyone above that is somehow magically white, shows one, a real lack of knowledge of how space works and how geography functions and how mobility and movement in the ancient world functioned. It shows a very limited view of our ancient sources. Like I said, I think I said this in another clip, if you're going to live by Herodotus, you got to die by Herodotus too. And if you're going to cite Herodotus for evidence of one thing, then you have to accept the fact that Herodotus says that black people, Ethiopians in our ancient parlance, Ethiopians really in our ancient parlance, are indigenous to North Africa. They're indigenous to Libya, which is his word for basically everything north of the Sahara, because as far as he's concerned, south of the Sahara is uninhabitable, right? They believe that was an uninhabited region, uninhabited zone. Nobody lived there. It was too hot. So.
And why did he And why did he believe that? He believed that because at the time, think about it, anything south of the Sahara, that's anything basically by the equator and under, because it's so hot. So I always say that's why our ancestors worship the sun. If most of the world believed that nothing lived down there, but actually life started from down there, and what she's saying is that when you use people, when we use these sources like Herodotus and all of these Greek people, we also have to remember that these people also came from, right, with their different ideas. And what he's saying is that anything at the below the Sahara, he said was inhabitable, and then he was saying you can't live there because it's too hot. But we know for a fact life started down there. So that's what she's saying, is that it's all bullshit. It's sad that we can see all these black scholars doing this shit, but it's more people that's not so-called black people, or whatever the case you want to call us, who actually bringing the true information and the truth out today. All right. While we're still arguing and debating, it's people that's non-biased to this, who doesn't care about race or what we so-called call race or anything. They just want the knowledge. So she's saying if you're going to quote these people, right, then you got to live and die by these people, because they also had holes in their story as well. So that's why you got to learn you research people, and you take the good information and you add it to your selection, and you take the bad information, because everybody might have some information at some point in their life that changes and evolves as they learn. So we got to know the key is knowing how to decipher through all this information and take what's needed and push to the side things that's not, and not just push to the side, but leave it somewhere in case we find out later that some evidence we overlooked, that we can go back and recover it.
This is, you have to understand that our ancient sources were very clear that in that northern part of Africa, that's where Ethiopians lived, were indigenous to. That means there were black people there. But also the people that we refer to now as either Nubians or Cushites, those were also called Ethiopians by our Greek sources. And they were in Egypt, and they controlled Egypt for various times. And we actually have a lot of evidence, if you put Egypt into its African context in antiquity, its vision is not to the north, right? It looks to the Nile and to what we would call south, right? To the upper Nile, the upper Egypt. And in fact, the cult of Isis is actually integrated across the what we would consider the two separate kingdoms of Egypt and Nubia in antiquity, but their worship of Isis is almost identical, and they are integrated and looking to each other as early as the second millennium BCE. So we really just need to not think.
So one of the things that she's saying, to make it clear, is that she's saying between the Egyptian culture, which is clearly it's closer to the Middle East. So this is, I want you to understand, the Nubia. When I tell you Nubia is the mother of Egypt, she's saying that Nubia and Egypt they ruled at the same time. They had kingdoms coexisting at the same time. Even though we know Nubia is older, but they ruled at the same time. Many times when Egypt got invaded by people coming out of what we call the Middle East, they would sack it and take it back and give it to the Egypt. They worked together, right? But we got to remember Imhotep, the first black genius, as we call him. So he was from Nubia. And how was he the first black genius if he was a doctor, lawyer, architect, but his mother and father was too? It tell you the mindset of the Nubians, or who we call the Nubians, because they didn't call themselves Nubians, right? It tells you who they were. But that's what Dr. Ben, she said that the representation of ISIS is almost identical. But the Egyptians were leaning on the Nubians for knowledge, and the Nubians were leaning on the Egyptians for some things, because they both derived from ancient civilization. Like Nubia still had its core, and then the Egyptians had its core from the indigenous Qing dynasty, also the Nile Valley mixture. So you see how this information, but how they knew that they were related and they worked together, is what she's saying.
Think about this separation, which isn't even a modern separation, right? This idea of sub-Saharan is a modern racist trope, that there is a magic dividing line. And it is a modern racist trope that develops back from, I'm thinking I should do an Ngram, Google Ngram, just to see when the term sub-Saharan first pops up in books, right? Because one of the things you can always tell is when things start to get hot and when they're not. But if you look at someone like Cuvier, who was one of the early scientists dealing with race back at sort of the turn of the 18th to 19th century, so 1801, 1802 or so. He's the guy who got Sarah Bartman's body after she died, the Hottentot Venus, and had it stuffed and had her genitals and things preserved for study. He makes clear comments about how taking the heads of mummies, which they were sort of just getting at this time out of Egypt, and her dead body and her face, and putting them together. And so here's this like 6,000 or 4,000 year old mummified head, which clearly is not in its original form, right? With her body, a model made of her, and says, look, it's very clear from looking at these two that regardless of whatever their skin color was, they're clearly different races. Because their heads are different, because he was a craniometry guy. So if you sort of think about when is this obsession with sub-Saharan kicking in, it's kicking in when we're trying to, in a period of time where we're trying to separate off Egyptian, so these these ancient kingdoms that are being discovered by modern Europeans, and the sort of Black South. And actually, I'm looking at a Google Ngram right here that goes back to 1800. Up to 2008. I'm going to smooth it out here a little bit more. And the term doesn't start to appear in books anyway, in English, in the English language, until roughly 1978. So why? Why does this term emerge? It has like very little life before that, and then all of a sudden in the 1960s and 1970s, I see here's an appearance of it in on communism in the Soviet Union. In sub-Saharan Africa is one of the earliest ones that I'm finding and marketing. So that divide seems to be one that has to do with economic policies and what they're viewing as economies in the modern state. It's all about development. So I think when people ask about this stuff, what they're really trying to ask, and they don't want to ask the question, so they use this phrase sub-Saharan, is, are Egyptians white like us? And they don't want to say that, because if they say things like that, then, because what happens when you sort of subsume whiteness for the entirety of North Africa, right? You want to claim the ancient civilization without modern Islam being attached to it. And then you want to separate it from blackness. That's the only reason why people use this term. There's no genetic distinction to be made here. There is no political distinction to be made here in antiquity, or in even clearly up until the modern world. If people aren't using the word, they're not making a distinction about it until they want to use it. All of Africa was a colonial playground until a certain period, and then we're going to make a distinction between the oil-rich Arab states and the mineral-rich and other resource-rich, exploitable states below the Sahara that are not oil-rich states, right? Agricultural versus other. So I think anybody asking the questions about sub-Saharan and how these ideas apply to the ancient world need to stop, because they are clearly.
So when she's making it clear that the reason for all of the confusion and the lingo in these books and some of the stuff that we constantly are in here confused about, the reason for all of this, right, is because she said, if you're going to be blunt, what they're really saying is that the white world is saying, they're trying to word it to say, well, are the Egyptians white, or are these great civilizations white? And in all the places where they found oil or wealth, they wanted to make it seem like, oh, that they're not areas where our ancestors or where we come from. That's the point she's making. She's also making a point that we have to stop allowing anybody, whether white, black, or anybody, to separate the Middle East, which is Persia, Iraq, or any of those nations, all the way going from China to Asia to what we call the Middle East, sub-Saharan area, into Africa. And we need to stop allowing people to separate that as if the kingdom of Egypt or Nubia was any different from the kingdom that was in China, because it was all considered one. And she said the proof is that she was trying to say is that the people that came up with these things in our American history and sciences, they had agendas. Right. So he said, like, he took that lady remember that lady in Hidden Colors they told her had that body? But when she died, he kept her sexual organs to study. So she was saying that what they would do was they was taking mummies they found from Egypt, and they was taking the heads off, after the heads off that, and the head from like that they kept from, right, the Egyptian mummy head, and they compared it to the head of the black women or the women that they were studying that had passed with the bodies. And they would say, well, clearly these are not the same people, because the skull on this mummy is different than the skull. And she says that's completely wrong. You can't use skull data or DNA from skull and all that. It's not a good science to determine whether people are related. The only two ways that whether people are related is genetics and the blood and the information that you're going to get from DNA. And she's saying, but when you look at the genetic information from the people of the, because remember earlier when I was disproving the Dane Calloway idea, he was saying that the word Moor only related to, he was like, it's like they use the word Moor for the Phoenicians, the Persians, the Ethiopians. So that doesn't mean, but I'm saying what you have to understand is that historically, genetically, they all carried a similar genetic trait. Regardless if this person left what we call Ghana and took 2,000 people and started a civilization over there. Let's just give an example. After 1,000 years, those people, they know where they come from through the history, but they have no true connection to the land of Ghana anymore. So if 1,000 years pass and now these people that's been living in this area, they have their own identity, own fashion, own clothing, right? And a lot of times their history, if it hasn't been tampered or haven't been conquered with, still points them back to that. But let's say in 1,000 years, after 100 years, 200 years, they have been conquered a few times. Now when you come back, now you got the blood of multiple nations, right, in yours. And then when you go back 1,000 years later to Ghana, you don't know your history because you were conquered by the Persians, the Greeks, and this. So in 1,000 years, you had rulers for 200 years from Greek, 100 years from here, right? So you lost your history. So understand what she's saying. We can't use studying of skulls to break down the identification of people completely, right? Now, when you talk about the cheekbones and certain things, that's what she's saying. Like, we use it as the phenotype, but phenotype is the science that helps. But remember, the science that we use to separate races and nations and people was sciences created to separate the people, right? And that's what she's saying. I'm gonna let her get back to it.
Absolutely modern impositions of ideas and ideology, and very clearly they are very recent modern impositions. And whenever people say that they want to avoid imposing modern ideologies onto ancient world, they're okay with imposing modern ideologies onto the ancient world as long as it's their modern ideologies, like the category of sub-Saharan. So I think we need to like nix that one. What you're really asking is, are they black or are they white? And the answer is neither, and both, but really neither. There's no white people running around in ancient Egypt. It's just not a category that they used. They did recognize people had blackness, black skins, and they recognized dark skin tones, but the idea of the white is a gender category, or a category used for people who are cold burned in the very far north, or it is a category that is used for people with certain diseases. Or we actually see it in a poem by Catullus referring to Caesar for a political party affiliation, the blacks versus the whites as a sort of political thing, and then we'll see it. The other place where it might be connected to these sort of politics is that it's also can be connected to chariot racing. Your team, your favorite team, the Greens, the Reds, these are teams. The whitewashing of North Africa also ties in. You think about this thing, the idea of whitewashing North Africa. Some of the loudest voices on the internet in wanting to ensure this dividing line between sub-Saharan Africa and North Africa are people of Arab descent. I'm thinking here specifically of like Nicholas Talib, right? Because particularly in the United States, since 1910 or so, right, the people who are called Syrian get to be white, right? So they're categorized, technically, people from the Middle East are categorized as white because of this 1910 or 1919 law that categorized them as white. But they don't get to live the experience of being white in America because they're Muslim. So, but I think there's this bind into people who have recent access to whiteness, particularly in the United States, but also in the Middle East, where there is anti-blackness, severe anti-blackness, that they want to make sure that they can make that harsh dividing line, right? And they are some of the loudest voices. And so whitewashing of the Middle East is an ongoing long-term historical process. But in terms of how Europeans and Americans are doing it, Europeans are doing it primarily as a way to lay claim to the antiquities of Egypt and Libya, which of course is colonized by the Romans. And so you find Roman sites all over Libya and other places. But then in the United States, it has to do with the fact that people who at the time were classified as Syrian, but what we really mean is people of Middle East descent or people of Arab descent from the Middle East. They got classified legally as white. And so think about what that looks like as someone like me, who is a white person, right, a European descent white person, saying to someone who is like Tlaib or something that North Africa isn't white, right? Or even more important is that this is actually what happened during the Mary Beard Tlaib debate, which was Beard was like, they weren't white, you know, Libya and these places are not white spaces. This is not a concept that exists in the ancient world. And Tlaib comes after her and says, who are you, colonizer, to kick me out of whiteness? Right? But it's all this obsession of wanting to participate in this dominant identity group that is called whiteness, which has no roots in antiquity and has no roots even really in much modernity outside of, I mean, it's really a creature of the U.S.
It really is. It really is a creature of the U.S. And what she's saying is that everybody's fighting for this whiteness, but this is the secret. See, when you're a historian, we have to dig law. This is why the best thing I did was studying law, because white is not what we think. It's not a people. The people, the whiteness he's speaking about legally is a status. So it's like being a celebrity is a status that make you better than the average person, a star, right? Being, you know what I'm saying? Being an NBA superstar, celebrity puts you above it. So the white that everybody's trying to be associated with is a status, not a people. That's why she said people from the Middle East can come here and when on their cards, when they get citizenship, they're considered white. When the Hispanics get their citizenship in America, they're considered white because it's a class system, not a people, right? But white originally legally meant anyone with Moorish blood because the true system was about who land it was. And it said the Moorish blood of the Hispanics and the Moors, right? Which means anybody with Moorish blood, which would be what we consider, right? So that's why I love how she's breaking this down. And it is an American construct. And I'm going to go back a couple seconds just so I can let her finish. Because she's really breaking this down.
Roots in antiquity and has no roots even really in much modernity outside of, I mean, it's really a creature of the U.S., though it appears in European texts earlier. We're the people who sort of run with it and turn it into this idea. And what we actually mean by white is dominant. We don't mean anything to do with our actual skin color. Earlier, we're the people who sort of run with it and turn it into this idea. And what we actually mean by white is dominant. We don't mean anything to do with our actual skin color.
What I was saying was, and I'm sorry for that, my mic was muted. What I was saying was that she was saying that white, even they know that white is not it's not a people. She just admitted that they know that. It's a status, meaning that everybody's arguing and fighting to be a part of the hierarchy. White being the highest parts of society, black being the lowest parts, the foreigners. See, it can mean homeland or high status or the celebrity or the people with the most say. Or black can mean foreigner, or as we use, as the disgraced people of the nation, or the lowest people of the society. That's what she just told you. Let me go back.
Really a creature of the U.S., though it appears in European texts earlier. We're the people who sort of run with it and turn it into this idea. And what we actually mean by white is dominant. We don't mean anything to do with our actual skin color.
So I like that. I see people in my YouTube are commenting, and you're right. Some of them not the ill-educated, and that's very true. And I thank you for the comments. For people on YouTube, that's where you see these comments coming from. The science, as they saying, the science of the Moors are finally sinking, and we are all these people. Meaning that, like, everybody, it's the color of the person, whether they white, black, Chinese, Hispanic, makes no difference. It's the mind and the heart, because I'll play you people of our scholars. I'll play you people that's Hispanic, whether good, bad, and different. I was playing the guy that I was debunking yesterday. I still love his mindset because he was trying to prove that America was the ancient world, not Africa. Which we got to be careful when we say this, because we got to also still continue to dig, because I don't disagree with him on that. And he was saying that the dark-skinned people in America, they're not Africans, right? He is saying that they were already here, which we're saying it too. So my argument with him is that I know for a fact that most of all dark-skinned people gave credit, even the Hawaiians, even ancient cultures everywhere, always pointed back to their homeland. Like they say, the Nubians and that, the original blood goes back to that type of blood. That's where they get the word Nubian and all of these. They're really just the words that they use to describe a certain stock. Right? So that's why I was telling y'all that the scholar of the guy, he was breaking it down, and I need to find it for y'all, because I know it was before the new year and I didn't have a lot of people on that day. Right? So hold on one second, you guys and ladies. Because I have to show you this. And the reason why I'm saying it, because it would only make sense if I can get to it. Let me see. I did make a playlist for the podcast. For everybody that knows, on YouTube, you go to Organic Minds Podcast. It's a playlist of all of the shows. Let me see. It's a season one. It's only got one though. Hold on. I gotta find this. It's crazy because the proof is here. The only question is that we gotta care about wanting to go get the information. And that's why it's important for people like me that's going to go get the information and bring it back and to be able to talk about it. So let me go down. I'm gonna have to go back manually, personally. Where we at? Because I'm gonna find y'all this is what I'm talking about. Because what he was breaking down was so important. All right, so they make it so difficult today sometimes on finding on certain things depending on how you move. Let me go live. So let's go. I'm gonna let y'all continue to watch the videos, and I'm gonna find it as we move forward. We're gonna finish the video because I'm gonna bring up the video I'm talking about. But while I'm looking, I'll just leave y'all with some more of this Absertima. But when he was in South America, continuing his part, because we heard yesterday about how the guy was discrediting his work. And I think it's only fair that while I look for this other information to show you what the guy was talking about, the truth about the Anunnaki and how they were Nubian, they were tall, 6'6", 6'7" feet Africans. I'm gonna find you this information. Hold on one second. But until then,
the white. I hired an AI personal assistant to do literally everything for me. I was lazy today. So in the morning, I'd highlight some. Until the head who had a right to put it together died. Thank God. It is absolutely important for us to take a very serious view of this, because we find again and again and again that you have a deliberate effort to wipe out the evidence, to hide it, to explain it away. Why is it that this photograph, even now, I am not permitted to use that until 1985, because it involves a whole series of things. But why is it that this head is not among the heads at Villa Hermosa, is not among the heads in the National Geographic or the Smithsonian or any traveling circus of Olmec heads? It is hidden at Tuxtla, where nobody goes. It's very important to note that that was the first head found, and it had a profound effect. Although it was the only thing found at that time that indicated an African influence. It was left to the expeditions of 1938 and 1939, expeditions carried out jointly by the Smithsonian Institute, the University of California, and the National Geographic, before they found more of these stone heads. They recovered the one at Tres Zapotes, and then they went on the next year in 1939. They went on to La Venta, and then they found 4 of these stone heads. They also found, and many of you have noted this in the museum at Villa Hermosa, at La Venta Park, you have noted the plan of the city.
I want you to look at that plan carefully. There is the first pyramid in America. There is the first step pyramid. There are the arms of the village. And on those arms stand the great stone heads facing the Atlantic Ocean. This is in the Gulf of Mexico. This is at the point which on the edge of the Gulf of Mexico where you find the terminus of the Atlantic currents from Africa. Because the currents from Africa take you to northeastern South America, into the Caribbean, into the Gulf of Mexico, swinging towards Florida. And then if you are lucky, if you learn as the Africans were later to learn, perhaps not at this period, you can find a circular current that takes you back towards Europe and Africa. Here at La Venta, they began to see a distinctive art style. Here at La Venta, they began to see something in the faces of the monuments, something in the traits, the cultural traits of the Olmec that was to leave its stamp on later civilizations like the Maya, out in Palenque, out in Monte Alban, out in Mitla, even in the evening, the twilight of the gods at Teotihuacan, out at Tatilco, at Cerro de las Misas, in the Monte Alban phase. All of these are branches coming out of the mother culture, the Olmec. And there's something very distinctive. Here, for the first time at La Venta, are the pyramids. Here, for the very first time, is found the sarcophagus, like in Egypt. Here, for the very first time, are monumental stelae and sculptures of colossal proportions. Here, for the very first time, are the great priest kings. Here, for the very first time, are enormous ceremonial temples and altars built to the gods. Some things must be said about the stone heads, which you must note. There is one of them that has a tube running from the ear out of the mouth, which was featured as an oracle, and it has a flat top which functioned as an altar. This is very important because it is that kind of oracular thing that was found in Egypto-Nubian the period. In order for the priest kings of the Egyptians to hold the world together, which was being torn apart, the Bible describes Egypt at that time like it describes the great factions and frictions in Egypt at that time. They speak of it as some sort of a torn nation. And in order to pull it together, they had to find once again the power of religion. Religion is responsible for the extraordinary vitality that built the temples and the pyramids and the great tombs of both Egypt and America. Note that. People do not do those extraordinary things. Only giants could do those things. Man becomes a giant when he develops a peculiar kind of focus, when there's a crystallization of his psychic energy. In civilizations that are highly fragmented, that have lost all their certitudes and cannot find again any kind of certitude and focus and power, the tremendous capacity to have the consciousness to operate as a giant is lost. Only giants can build those things. It has nothing to do with size, because the American is small in size. It has nothing to do with machines, because the Egyptian machines were crude compared to the machines we have today. It has to do with a peculiar kind of consciousness which made it possible for one to do things.
So I found it. Okay, so what they was talking about, I was able to find it, right? Now watch, it's from one of my podcasts a month ago before the year started. And when he's giving you the background, now watch.
And just keep your eyes on stuff like this that's going on in the world. And I want to get to my last topic about, there's a lot of things for people that, at the end I always do my history section. I spent time to really talk about the Anunnaki or the Sumerians, because I thought it was interesting that I came across something where there was a white guy talking about how they never tell the truth and that about who they are, and they told you. So I want for all the people that want to know the truth about certain things and get a more edge in those things, right? This video is called The Epic of Gilgamesh, Secret Revealed. And this is one of the oldest civilizations on Earth.
It was a mystery all along. The origin of the Sumerians has been the subject of very intensive debate.
They make it sound like it was a mystery all along, as if we didn't know where the people and the culture in ancient Mesopotamia came from.
The Sumerians, along with the Egyptians, are known for being the earliest known people to develop a fully developed writing system.
And in their explanations, they completely omit the clear and obvious evidence of the Sumerian origin, like the earliest form of the Sumerian writing system, cuneiform, which is identical in form and often in meaning to hieroglyphics.
But we also are referencing people who spoke the language that we call Sumerian.
And since that language has been deciphered, let's listen to what the Sumerians themselves have to say about who they were. And we will do this by reading one of the most famous ancient texts, the Epic of Gilgamesh. From this text, you will see that there is no shortage of evidence to demonstrate that the Sumerians were clearly black. And it is not just in the name they gave themselves, Salmat Kakadi, or Sagigu, meaning the people with the black heads. No, it goes deeper than that. And it has meanings and lessons that will free the minds of those with a receptive ear.
We got it last week. I think I know what it is. Are you serious? You guys, thank you. The color that you wanted. You know the
Associated with the underworld, the term Anunnaki often refers to deities in the broadest sense. The Anunnaki, the great gods, have taken up dwellings in your midst and consume their food in your Giguna shrines with their single tree. When researcher Hermel Hermstein embarked...
I want to stop this real quick. Remember yesterday, or was the day for yesterday when we were studying China, there was a certain part of China, and I always like to connect dots. In China, what did they call themselves? The Naki, meaning the dark ones. So keep that in mind. Then ancient China, when we study ancient China, that thing, what did he say? That they were known to call themselves the Aki and Anu, Naki, right? Anu goes back to Anu in Egypt, right? Anu Naki. So I want you to pay attention to that. That's why I just wanted to point that out to y'all.
Embarked on his quest to find the real origins of the Sumerian people, there was one piece of evidence which clarified without a shadow of a doubt who the Sumerians were. It was the collection of cranium from early to mid-Mesopotamian periods. Their analysis showed consistency with other anthropological evidence, and Hermstein related to us that, quote, Neolithic West Asia had a similar population to pre-dynastic Upper Egypt. The cuneiform tablets were first translated by Assyriologist Sir Henry Rawlinson. The breakthrough came when they realized that cuneiform, the writing system found on the tablets in ancient Mesopotamia, represent two distinct languages, Sumerian and Akkadian. And this discovery, paired with the true origins of the Sumerian language, enabled Rawlinson to crack the cuneiform code. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the hero Gilgamesh leads the spirit of his friend Enkidu in the underworld, where the Anunnaki act as judges and lawmakers. In Tablet 8 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, it reads, Gilgamesh laments 7 days and 7 nights. He wept for his friend Enkidu until the worm fastened on him. Only then he gave him up to the earth. For the Anunnaki, the judges had seized him. It is through this timeless epic of an unlikely brotherhood that the ancients impart unto us the most important lessons of life. And in so doing, they reveal to us how we came to be. But most important of all, they tell us who they really are, and how they came to create the civilizations on the fertile lands of the Tigris and Euphrates. In the Tablet 5 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the humans of the land saw what had become of Enkidu, Gilgamesh's brother-in-arms, he who was previously unclothed, savage, and uncivilized, when they saw Enkidu, they proclaimed, How is he become like Gilgamesh suddenly? In form, he is shorter. In other attributes, he is made powerful. Milk of the cattle he drank. This revealing verse indicates to us that Gilgamesh, the hero and demigod who walked and interacted with the gods, and who also had their favor, Gilgamesh was in the likeness of the Anunnaki, tall, powerful, and knowledgeable of things that were beyond those of the people of the land. But even more telling is the verse of the description of Gilgamesh's hair when he had remained in the wild for too long, and it tells us Gilgamesh's true origin. After his exile in the wild, our demigod, Gilgamesh, is described as follows. Gilgamesh, in the plain, his hair growing thickly like the corn. Now, who do you know that has hair that grows like corn when untreated? You guessed it, black Africans. Remember Sir Henry Rawlinson, who deciphered the cuneiform scripts? Rawlinson also revealed that the Sumerians were the original Scythic and Turanian people he called Kushites. But this fact was suppressed by following influential Assyriologists like Oppert. It is only in recent years, with the re-examination of Rawlinson's original work and the added perspectives of genetic findings, linguistic studies, and analysis of cranial remains, that we can now identify with confidence the true origin of the early Mesopotamian civilization. The true originators of the Epic of Gilgamesh were black Africans who migrated from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex. And the story of the epic fits perfectly with the historical facts that a people, a tall and all-knowing people, with powers beyond those of the land in Mesopotamia, came and brought civilization. Both in their deeds, their possessions, and their form, they were seen as gods. And they would have been. So, who are those Anunnaki that they speak of? None other than the tall black African stock from the Nubio-Kemetic civilization complex, coming to Mesopotamia as colonists, bringing their civilization and culture with them. And who were the locals of Mesopotamia? They would have been the Negritos, the descendants of the black Natufians who had lived in that area for millennia, and had remained black from 10,000 BC to 2500 BC as the historical record shows.
All you gotta do is
Oh, you've never used samples like this before. This is
It let me know my mic was muted. The only reason why I showed this video and the only reason why I was going back was to show you about how much they misguide us, right? And this guy was showing us that there's been proven, and he's showing you that those people that they're calling the gods, right? That, and we take all information. Remember, we're not just going to say that it's complete truth, but I'm just giving you all sides, right? Let's be clear about what I'm saying. He's saying that if you look at the historical record and you match it up with things, then you will realize that what we call Nubian, because we learned about that, the Nubian stock, which is, we're talking about the people, that we can clearly see the LeBron, the KDs of the world. See, when you think of the pictures they showed you like tall people today, but like coordinated. But you don't think, what about the coordination of LeBron and KD? These people that walk and have the same coordinations as the shorter people. And the Negritos, if you know, they are very short people like the pygmies. And it said that they stayed what we call black. Now, mind you, I want to keep saying when we watch these videos, we will use the term black or African American or whatever on this station because we can't call people anything that they don't really technically understand. The people that call themselves Moors, they can call themselves Moors, which I identify, right? People that call themselves Israelites, I got friends, right? People who call themselves whatever, Christians and religious, whatever they identify with, that's what people are going to call themselves. So as educators, we're going to meet people where they are to bring them to where we should be. But we can't, I'm not trying to bring any of my followers or listeners to any spiritual place of trying to make them follow me religiously. I'm just giving you information, and we take this journey together. And I want to be clear. But what he's showing you, and I'm just constantly giving you seeds for you to dig and find, is he's saying that the reason when you got these people of pygmy stock, anywhere from 2 feet to 4 or 5 feet at the most, the tallest ones, right? But they're like dwarfs and short people, right? And they were some of the oldest people on earth is these short pygmy stock, right? And they were all over the planet, from the Philippines to the middle, they all over. So, and these are some of the oldest people from the bottom of Africa. When they're living in these places, when these Kemetic people, as we would call them, right? Because like that lady was saying earlier, the empire stretched from Nubia all the way across the Middle East into China, because even the Qing dynasty told you that they identify with what people. So that's why I go so, you know what I'm saying? That's why I go so wide, because I'm not trying to prove a point to you. I'm trying to point you in a bunch of information areas so that you can dig and you can point us, you can come back to the group or to the world and then find out what you found. And our job is to constantly research these areas and find holes and gaps and to make each other think so that we can present each other information. Like the person that's in my feed right now on YouTube, who is constantly, you see, I'm sharing the knowledge from him or her, I'm not sure. So from this person, because I'm not saying I disagree or agree, because I do agree with a lot they say, but at the end of the day, this is very important information, right? So we're going to learn from the information I'm giving you. We're going to learn from what I'm saying and from the feed, other people coming in these feeds and dropping knowledge. And as much as I can on YouTube, I can show this, right? So if you're not on my YouTube, find me on YouTube, which my channel is Black House. Just type in Organic Minds Podcast or type in Truth About American Moors, or go to my page, which is Black House, BLACCHOUZE, and then you'll see my live there, and you can write on the feed if you want to be a part of that, right? And for people in the future that want to come up here and speak, I need y'all all to go download the StreamYard app and then hit me directly. Find me on Facebook as Willie Walker, on Instagram as Willie Walker 1551, right? And that's Willie Walker, WILLIE WALKER on Facebook, and you'll see my face. I'm an artist. And then on my Instagram is Willie Walker at 1551. And send me a direct link, and then that's how we can build, and you can come up and express what you understand, and we can dialogue, right? But I just wanted to express it so that we're clear about what I'm doing in my goal here. So I just wanted to show y'all that from earlier when she was saying that there's no separation and it's all this, they're just trying, the only reason why there's skepticism about what looks like and what does who look like, and the reason why this is even an issue is because people around the world, whether the Chinese today, the Arabs today, the Hispanics today, they're all trying to figure out, is this us? But the evidence is constantly saying like it's not you, it's these people that we call blacks, but it is you. Because that's what she said, it's not them, but it is them. Because it's not them, because when you see the phenotype on the Olmec statue, some of them look African from straight from Ghana in that area. Some of them look the Chinese black man, some of them look like as when you go through different areas, they look like them. Now, I wouldn't take no credit for them because some of the rulers as time went along started to look like them. But like I told you, and everybody keeps saying that, a lot of people thought I was just making that up when I said, when we watch the documentaries about the Olmecs and about the ancient civilization, especially the Olmecs, they always say, as the guy say, only 10% of the statues and only 10% of the bones are even African out of all of the Olmecs. But then when you find out that the 10% were the ruling class, that gives you a different perspective, right? So that means the people that was given direction and that the ones, the great minds that organized everything or had people, or mind you, they came over because the world had been at, we forget that constant nations was at war, different times, different people. So in each empire in Egypt, there was prisoners of war from Samaria, there's prisoners of war from what we call China, prisoners of war from South America. Mind you, we could have conquered a people in Europe that had slaves from what we call the Olmec civilization, and we inherited. So it's that simple, right? Prisoners of war, right? Phenotype, look, exactly. You know what I'm saying? It's really a look, right? But in reality, the truth is in the main thing we need to understand is that we didn't identify with any of these names. Every name I'm telling you, Olmec, that's not what they call themselves. I know some people that said they call themselves the Zai people, right? When they came over. And then you know, the names that we given are just the names that the scientists or anthropologists named or gave to the areas as a name of study. Because even when they tell you about Nubia or these places, they said, well, they didn't call themselves that on the walls. They called themselves this. And like he was saying that their names on the walls meant the black heads. So know that we didn't call ourselves black people, but we did identify as a darker hue, right? So that's why in Samaria and all these places, or like the Black Mountains, the word black is what they put on it as a connotation, because it's the whatever that word that they're covering. The best way we can describe it today is by saying black. Because if we say, oh, this and that, the people will have no understanding. Please understand, people of other nationalities, that when we use the word black and when you see our educators educating each other, that they're not blackwashing history. They're trying to give a people of Americas. Because if he said that we're not the blacks that came from Africa and we was here already, they understand in order to get those so-called not African dark-skinned people back to understanding who they are, we have to first identify them through their traumas and their mindset as black. And from there, we can bridge the gap, right? And I'm not saying I don't identify as black, even legally in the courtrooms, all of that. But I'm still open-minded, right? And so I just wanted to say that. He was proving in this video that there is evidence that the Nubian stock is a giant stock of 6 foot to 7 feet, right? We see it in America. There's no question we got LeBron. Look at all of these athletes that's walking around today in America. And we know for a fact historically, Goliath's mother was from America. Her name was like MacArthur. If you read and dig. So America was the land of the giants, historically. And so I'm gonna continue because I just wanted to go back because all of the information that we was watching today, it was like, it was going back and forth and it was telling us, you know, some of the same information, but sometimes it's good to triangulate the information. Give me a second. So the Ivan, did it take the Ivan? So okay, I'm gonna let y'all finish watching this as I get things together. But I appreciate y'all tapping in. Please write in the feed. Tell me how you feel about the information. If you got anything to say or want it posted, just let me know. Because if I can find it and put it up here, I will. And I appreciate y'all.
Things so monumental that even we now, with our great machines, cannot attempt to do what the Africans did. It is so extraordinary that just a few years ago, the American government sent out a team to study how the Egyptians moved heavy objects across the sand. And in spite of all of our technology, when one of the great nuclear things with nuclear reactors were being moved across the deserts of at Gary, they used the identical method the ancient Egyptians used. This is the high technology, the 20th century, looking for a method that was the most practical and efficient method for moving a heavy object across the sands. So you're not dealing here with primitives, in spite of the ancient nature, in spite of the time, the prehistoric time of these cultures and civilizations, you're dealing with highly sophisticated people, a state of mind, a consciousness that made it possible for this extraordinary leap to occur. And the peculiar thing about the Olmec is that that leap occurs with all the Egyptian elements in it. It had its own native elements. It had its jaguar. The jaguar is not Egyptian. Nobody in Egypt or Nubia has a jaguar that they worship. There's a little cat cult in Nubia, which I noted, but it's not equivalent at all to the great jaguar which prowled the swamps of the Olmec. Why then suddenly they start with things which are duplicated nowhere else in the world in such a complex, in such a combination, in such an arbitrary combination? The stelae with the hieroglyphs, the monumental sculpture, the sarcophagus, the pyramids, the step and the true pyramid, and all of these elements, and even including, as I have shown, the bird and the serpent on the crown of the Egyptians and the Olmec, and all of the monarchic traits, a whole series of monarchic traits that distinguish royalty in the Olmec world and in the Egyptian world. Clearly, we have evidence of some kind of body of people who came into the Olmec world at that time. And there is a reason for this, because people have asked, okay, fine. All right, people can cross the Atlantic, fine. You have proven they have boats, fine. But why did they come here? The Egyptians have no business in the Atlantic, which is true. Egyptians have no business in the Atlantic. The Atlantic is very, very far from Egypt. And Egyptian ships have no right in the Atlantic circa 800 BC. The reason why they are in the Atlantic at all, in the North Atlantic, is because of an unusual situation that is occurring in the Mediterranean at that point in time. It is very important, therefore, not only to study what was happening in Mesoamerica, but to study what was happening at that point in time in Egypt and Nubia. What you have is a war going on between Africa and Asia. The Asiatics are attacking everyone in the Mediterranean. They have smashed the Hittites. They have taken iron smelting process from the Hittites. They have smashed the Phoenicians.
I want y'all to understand why I took it, why I've been bringing this information when I spoke about the guy going against Ivan. Now, that's when I start asking, are you an agent? This man spent his whole life, whether if his father was a European man and his mother was black, and then to go back at the end of the day, he's still identified. But I will tell you this is a very, very brilliant man. This is a very intellectual person. I don't care about what you believe, what your daddy look like. You could be any race, color, nationality, as I know nationality. And if your heart is pure, I hear you. But I know we know when he was making a point that he's not even black, we just ignore that. But this man, his mind, how he went about it, like he said, in Mesoamerica, like that's what the guy was saying. What business did the Egyptians have even being in the Atlantic? Because I even showed you yesterday that they got maps. They found maps in Egypt of the Americas, meaning that they had already went back and forth. But he's saying that in order to understand the problem is in America, they saying like, don't take our greatness by saying they came over here, right? But he's saying that I want you to remember that people had been traveling out of Africa for a long time because, population, just exploring. We're naturally explorers. We was exploring, finding new lands before turmoil and trauma. It wasn't like we were just sitting in Africa all the day and one day we got in trouble and then started leaving. We've been left. Multiple people left. People didn't get along. It's still going on today. But he's saying if you want to know what's going on, you can't study ancient Mesoamerica until you understand what was going on at the same time in Africa and what was going on at the same time in China and what was going on in Europe at these time periods. Because then you get a bigger worldview of what was going on for them. So what would make them leave is my point.
And they made vassals of the Phoenicians who have always been servants of the Egyptians and the Nubians. 50% of the Egypto-Nubian navies are Phoenician. These are people who shake onto the up claims, who were once black, who, like the Arabs who were once totally black in Saudi Arabia, became mixed with Asiatics, and you get this, what you call the Semitic type. So that you have a mixed type Phoenician, which it gets black again as it enters North Africa and begins to intermingle once again with black people, until by the time of Hannibal, the Phoenician or Punic type is African. This type is restless up and down the Mediterranean. It has its cities at Tyre and Sidon, its great ports, but it's restlessly moving up and down the Mediterranean. And because the Asiatics block the seaports to the Indian Ocean, block the seaports to the Pacific, and we do have evidence of the Egyptians in the Pacific. We have Egyptian script found in Hawaii. These guys are ranging far out. Nothing stops the Egyptian. Wherever you go, you find him. I have found him in Spain. They have Egyptian villages in Spain, where Barry Fell has shown the cartouches of the Libyan kings around 1000 BC are found at Almunecar, Spain. And that runs right through the Spanish mention in their early chronicles that Taharqa, the Nubian general who is later to become...
I want to say this. Remember that in school in America, because even when I was in Full Sail, it's certain parts of learning that we're not allowed to do. So what he just did, in some sense, I can see how some American scholars would say, oh, that's not proper, but that was the reason why they enslaved our learning. We're not allowed in America. Let's say what he just did, right? So in education system in America, let's say what he just did, for example, he was saying that, let's say in the coffins or the sarcophagus or the areas where they found the bodies let's say they found bodies of royal members in Europe. And they had they used the same chemicals in their bonding, the same hairdressers, the same skin, they looked the same, got the same practices, buried the same clothing. They brought all of this, like everything similar. We're not allowed in America to say that they're the same people. So even though there's houses built in Africa, right? That like in Nubia or Ghana, and these same type of houses are found in South America. But we can't say that, we're not allowed to say. What are they doing to us then? So you telling me that this style of building made it to America without the people coming? Or vice versa? Or saying that the people came from America and went into Africa? Because that could be it. But we're not allowed to say that either, right? So that's the issue with our learning system. We're not allowed to compare.
Come the king of Nubia and Egypt enters Spain with the garrison, so that the Africans are already in Europe. They're invading. They come in with the garrison into Spain, and then they retreat back because they have their own problems at home. So that we have evidence of movements in the direction west of the Mediterranean towards Africa, towards that part of Africa. And more fleets were driven, both military as well as commercial fleets were driven west of the Mediterranean, because tin was needed for the bronze armies, because this was the late Bronze Age. Copper was needed in Cyprus, tin was needed. They went right up into the British Isles and the North Atlantic searching for tin. And around 600 BC, we have the Phoenicians going from Ezion, Geber, and going right down and coming right across Africa, right around Africa, right back into the Mediterranean. The Europeans did not go into the Atlantic because the Europeans were terrified of the Atlantic. The Europeans spoke of the Straits of Gibraltar as if there were monsters in the sea. They did not attempt any movement in that area. But the Phoenicians did, and they were very much tied up, as I say, with African navies. That is the reason why many of the great heads have military helmets. Not all of them do, but they're distinguished by military helmets. They are a warrior dynasty because this is a period of war. For nearly 200 years, the world is in a state of war, as we are. Since the 1930s right up to the 1980s, every major army in the world has been ready to fight. We are in that state in which both the Africans and the Asiatics were. We cannot relinquish that state in this century until there actually is a war, which God forbid. But we cannot relinquish that state. All armies are armed to the teeth in the 20th century world. Regardless of whether you go down into Latin America, whether you go into the Caribbean, whether you go into Africa, whether you go to Israel, whether you go into Russia, whether you go through Eastern Europe, every army on earth now is armed to the teeth, ready and waiting for the conflagration, which, pray God, may never come. But that was the state of the world, where therefore a warrior dynasty appears with the great helmets. The warrior dynasty appears among the Olmec, carrying all of these elements. You find that apart from the stone heads which we have seen, we see cultural traits which I have mentioned, and then we go on to see, as I have also mentioned, that when the Olmec move out of Levanta and they send parts of their elite out at Tlatilco, at Cerro de las Misas, and at Monte Alban, when they study the skeletal evidence right in this territory at Monte Alban, when they go to the graves in this very part of Mexico, in Oaxaca, when they go to the graves of Monte Alban and they look at the ruling class, not the common people have nothing to do with it. The common people are Zapotec, later they're Mixtec, etc. But the ruling class, when they go into the graveyards, 4.5% of the ruling class here at Monte Alban is African. As much as 13.5% of Tlatelolco is African. They're not in the common graves, and you can tell because side by side with the native, you're finding a different nose bridge, which remains in skeletal evidence. There's a ridge, there is a nasal index, there is a brow ridge, there are structures of the jaw, there are lengths of the arm. The African arm is different from the Asiatic arm. The lengths, the proportional.
See, he's this the thing, and that's why I wanted to play this for y'all. Ivan Sertima is not, he's not even saying that there wasn't people here. He's saying that there were, he's just clearly said that they were people here, right? And y'all know, but the point was, he was saying that when we talking about, see what he's saying, there were people that were here already. People that are, you think nobody had ever made it to the Americas before? Only the Europeans were afraid of the Atlantic, thinking that they were going to fall off the edge of the world historically. You know what I'm saying? The Chinese met them before. They told Christopher Columbus this as well, right? So even the people that have been on the land for 20,000 years, who could have came from, their ancestors came from, right? When they meet people coming across the water, this is a new experience for them. So even at each time, they kept telling you that they were in contact with each other on both sides, from the spears to the gold to the cotton, right? So that's the reason. And so that's one of the reasons why I sit back and I always say, I always deal with older scholars of a different era, because they were digging for different reasons than today. Today, most of our scholars are the people that's on the YouTube and internet. They're really not pure. That's why when I watch them, it's like as knowledgeable as they can be, they're not pure to the truth. If you go into looking for information with a point to prove, then you really closing yourself off, because that means every time you come against stuff early on that contradicts what you're feeling, you'll push it to the side unless you open-minded. You know what I'm saying? But the point is, he said that he's saying the ruling class, right? There's a certain percentage. So it's just letting you know that there's a connection between whether if it's marriage in or people coming over. So, and remember that when the people came over, they came over with multifaceted people, because the world had been amalgamated, had been mixed a long time ago. This before slavery and shit. There was wars and thousands of wars between nations before the colonization, between our people, between different nations. And there was a constant mixture. So when he was like the America was multi-shaded before, it was like Africa was multi-shaded before there was ever anybody there. To think that everybody was dark skinned, that's not true. It's definitely hotter on the lower part of Africa, but there's definitely an influence. Just like we know today that 2 dark skinned people can have an albino baby. There's proof in all of this information. We just have to be open enough to not get too biased so that we can continue to follow what we need to follow. You know what I'm saying?
The proportions of the body are different. You find not only skulls, but extended skeletons for study at Tlatelolco. And Wierzyński making allowance for all the blending and mixing of things still comes out with the conservative estimate of 13.5. We even have graves where you have an African male lying beside a Native American female, indicating that you're having mixings and meltings into different kind of population in some places. And when the Olmecs stretched out, when we went to Teotihuacan, that is the evening, that is quite late. Teotihuacan is around the birth of Christ. This is long after the morning of the Olmec. But there again, you see the Olmec. You see the jaguar at Teotihuacan. And you see the jaguar undergoing a strange transition where the plume serpent is becoming the powerful thing in Mexico, which it was in Egypt. In America, the United States, the stars and stripes is our great emblem. In Egypt, it was the plume serpent. In Mexico, it is the plume serpent. Even today, the plume serpent is the stars and stripes of Mexico, as it was the stars and stripes of ancient Egypt. Can all this be coincidence? Here at Teotihuacan, here they're building this enormous pyramid, and here all the major principles of the Egyptian pyramid are in evidence. The base is identical. Some people had said it was 1 meter off, but now they find that the meter mistake is what they calculate for error in the reconstruction of the site. Because all those sites, that pyramid was buried under the ground. They did not see it. Many of these things that we're seeing today were not visible in Mexico 30 years ago or 40 years ago. People only started digging those things up out under the earth. This is not standing here looking at the Mexican. They had to find those things again. They found some levels and then they had to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. The story is still largely untold. Victor Damas has pointed out at Palenque, which was called Palquin, that they have 400 temples in the jungles. They haven't started digging yet. They don't have the money. And as you know, with archaeologists, they have their political reasons for digging. Look at Leventa. That's the most important site. Nobody can go to Leventa unless he is an archaeologist sent out by the government. The oil fields are there. They don't allow anybody to come into Leventa. That's on the big shroud. They're doing a lot of excavation. They're finding things not in.
So if a lot of these sites we can't even go to, right? So everybody, that's what I say, understand, a lot of these sites we can't go to. These men like Dr. Ben Ivan Sertimer, they had access to these areas because of the high level of degrees and knowledge they got. So that's what I say as an educator, I'm not against you, because we need the educators from in the schools and out the schools, and we need some of them to be both, to have the education in the colleges and the high doctorate degrees at Harvard and Stanford and Europe and shit, but also while they was doing it, they also was looking for the spirit for the people, right? Meaning that Ben Sertimer can go to the Pan-African movement, he can go to all of these places, anywhere you want, right? But you never hear him say much of it, right? The ability of his ability to be able to get access, him and Dr. Ben, because they were highly educated. They went to schools in Europe. They had degrees in Africa, went to places in America, some of them, you know what I'm saying? They had degrees in multiple places. He's from South America. He got degrees out there, and he got degrees in Europe or London. Dr. Ben got degrees in Africa. He got degrees in London. He also was in America because he was a teacher, and you know, that's why they were so important. See, the issue is that we won't, until we find a few more men who get that type of education, who are still spiritually rooted in the true spirit of whatever you want to call people that look like me. What you choose to call us and identify us with, I could care less, right? And those, as we grow spiritually, we keep going back for other reasons. But I've been Sertimer that's why I hold on to the knowledge. I don't think that everything, you don't hold on to every word. As my grandfather said yesterday, he said, look, man, the goal is to take all the information. But because we're in the age of information, he said, always remember, it's so much information. The gift is to be able to cipher through it and know what to throw away or what to put aside and what to hold close. That's the key. We're in the age of information. There's information to support everybody's ideology and theories today. But now you got to be intelligent and smart enough to know how to find truth and how to search for pure detail, and also learning how to use your own mind and connection to nature in the universe to cipher through these things, right? Finding the common self. But I'm saying he definitely acknowledged multiple times that there were people here, right? He definitely acknowledges, so we can't take that from that guy, right? But we also have to ask, with the people, if they was here the whole time when the world was one, when everything happened, right? Then who are these people, right? How did they become? Because now we still got to talk about the people that came over the Bering Straits with the ice before the ice melted, that came in through the back of like Asia, and with that, the Mongoloids that came in, right? And then we got to talk about the people that came over, like the Olmecs, and some of these people are the people that came to integrate it. But the people that they're studying, they want to know who the people are that were building the great structures, not the common man. And we need to get this understood. The studies is not the common man in America, even back then, was melanated on different shades. But I've already shown you, and I'm not gonna keep going back, which is love. So y'all go back through the podcast and find about how when the Chinese came over here at a certain period and was like they were looking for their long lost ancestors, and then they mixed in, and then they mixed in. You can see this, and then the people from the Pacific came in through the back of this side, and then they mixed in, and then they came in. America, that's why it's a melting pot. But before we get to the Americas, because one thing that I will give him credit for, and anybody that's digging, and I respect the brother from yesterday that I was debunking what he was saying, because he was trying to make it seem like I've been certain was a fraud or just trying to, no, he's trying to lift a spiritual of a people up we're trying to figure out who the fuck we are. We're not trying to make anything black, because if it was up to every other race, the Mexican government and everybody down there, they had these statues and they ain't said a word. But my point is, when I've been certain is letting you know that you have to be a part of the government or get permission to go to these areas, what are they hiding? If everything they found in the ground supported that it was the people that we call, and no disrespect, the Hispanics, because y'all are brothers, the Hispanics or Europeans or anybody else, they would open, they would listen, the museums would be free. They'll be taking every school in Mexico or every European to these museums and making us learn about it. Like, look, in the ground, what do we see? Look at the sculpture that goes back 10,000 years ago. This is European. This is what we call the Hispanic today. This is the statue, right? But when they dig and they find, and then they keep digging and digging and digging. And like Dr. Ben said, the more they dig, the more they keep digging, the blacker it gets. So why are these areas locked off? And these are the most important areas, La Venta and these areas, right? And then I want you to remember, they keep talking about stone heads. Do you think that they're just all heads? Or do you think that in the ground there's full bodies? Even the places where you see these 50-foot stone heads coming out the ground, you ever thought to, why won't they let us go there and let us dig around them stone heads? I bet you there's bodies just as big as the ones in Egypt of like Ramesses and them. So the question is, that's why historically we're not supposed to be arguing whose land is it between the dark-skinned people, because we won't use black, right? The dark-skinned people of the indigenous Americas and the Hispanics, right? But we know that they're descendants of us and mixers, right? But we're not taking anything from them because they're our brothers and we love them wholeheartedly. But we shouldn't be arguing who was here first, because according to law, the land belongs to the Moors and the Hispanics. We should stop arguing that point and let's get the information about who. This is ours. And not saying this as far as founding, but what are our roots? What are our roots? Why are we, well, like when he made his documentary, it kind of bothered me, but I told you all last year, I seen all over Facebook and Instagram, and about like people writing and saying our people have only been servants. The nerve of motherfuckers, straight up. Your people have only been servants of people. Your people at their best was servants. I have a homeboy right now, and he was married to a girl from Brazil, and they're not together no more. I won't say his name. But he told me when he met her mom light skinned, she don't like black people. Her dad is like brown skin, which is kind of, you know what I'm saying? But he know that we the same people. But that exists in Mexico, and this race, they got their racism too. Even though I meet a lot of Hispanics that I work with through years that are looking at me like, look at my face, and they always they be like, yo, a lot of Hispanics I work with, and I love the Hispanics I work with a lot, they my people. They tell me like, yo, I look like they great grandfathers. So what is that telling you? And I talk everywhere I go, I run my mouth. And it's like, even in the buildings that I'm at and I'm working, I'm allowed to have these conversations, even with customers. That's how powerful this is, that even my bosses in places be like, yo, you should pull me to the side, like, yo, have that conversation, bro. It's okay. And I'd be like, word, you know what I'm saying? Because I be trying, he'd be like, I noticed you kind of avoid him a little bit. And he was like, you ain't got to avoid him. You smart enough to know how to navigate him. And shout out to my boy Cornell, who in Durham, because he was definitely influential in that, you know what I'm saying? So, and he was my manager. So I want to say this. We're going to get back to this knowledge and keep watching. But it's very important for us to understand that we can't let people attack the great minds of us. You can feel however you want to feel respectfully. That's the reason why I've been so compassionate about it, because there's going to come a time where 50, 100 years, somebody going to find my videos and they're going to try to destroy me. And I pray that the people that rock with me are going to stand up on the principles to say that he never said those things. This is what he did it for. This is what's his reasoning.
Word about what they're finding. We go to Palenque. Palenque is only partly dug up. You see the great tomb and temple. They say it's the only burial found in the pyramid. That is not true. It is the only complete man found in a tomb at the bottom of a pyramid in America. But there mentioned many pyramids in the Americas in which you have urns, 1 or 2 sarcophagi, skeletons, all sorts of things found in the hollow of the pyramids. So that it is evidence that they were not only used as temples but as tombs. People have said that there is a distinction to be drawn between the American pyramids and the Egyptian pyramids. That American pyramids are stepped, whereas the Egyptian pyramids are conical. That American pyramids are used only as temples, whereas the Egyptian pyramids are used as tombs. This is not true. The Egyptians began building the step pyramid, which you find at Levanta. When the great black genius Imhotep began building pyramids, he did not build a conical pyramid, he built a step pyramid. There are many step pyramids, not very many, but they're still surviving out of the 60 pyramids that survived, the 60 major pyramids in a complex in Egypt.
I want to say this real quick. The step pyramids, Imhotep, the great mind, right, who they said designed the pyramid for Khufu, of Cairo, he comes from Nubia. He also the people that delivered Nefertiti and them baby. So he was an architect, he was a doctor, he was a healer, he was a mathematician, right? But he came from Nubia. So when you go to, that's why they're showing you, when the step pyramids, there's step pyramids in Africa as well. Now, I'm not going to argue the point right now about what we're trying to learn is, what we need to find out is, which ones are older? And even better yet, it show once we find out what are older, which we know that they're saying, like they keep saying the oldest pyramids. I've seen documentaries where and studies where it say these pyramids in Africa are the oldest pyramids in the world, and I've seen documentaries where say there's a pyramid in America and there's a pyramid in Mexico. That's the 2 oldest pyramids in the world. If the ones in America are, that's just more proof that there were intermarrying or connections or traveling back and forth. We're still arguing the same shit at some point. Who did it first or why? That okay. But the question is, if there are similarities, like you said, and we just seen it on the podcast, they're saying that the arguments have been that the pyramids in America, there is no bodies there. But I've heard them say in Africa that you don't find any bodies. Cat said there's not tombs. Now, has there been people that came along? And remember, there are foreigners. After we get from like the 5th dynasty, these are dark-skinned people coming in from ancient people that maybe came back, that intermingled, and their races came back. But remember, foreigners invaded and ruled Egypt for hundreds of years, and they stole and wrote their names on temples and buried there and created sarcophaguses and put their self in these places. Dr. Ben always said, when you go to Egypt, you see Ramesses the Great. That's why they always start Ramesses with the pharaoh from the Bible, because it's no way he can have all. He has so many great buildings and statues and stuff done, like way more than any other pharaoh, that it's like he had to have so many slaves. But the truth of the matter is, Dr. Ben said at some point the mind tells you that he had to be a thief a little bit. He definitely, in his lifetime, he was an architect. So he intentionally went to ancient sites and had his people build things there. So he put himself in all of these ancient sites, right? I'm not knocking Ramesses. That's what he did. He put himself on every site. And then there's areas that he took credit for that he had nothing to do with it. Because as they kept excavating and finding things, they found other stories. Or it was one brother, it was one child who killed his brother and erased their whole family out of fucking history until they found certain things and sarcophaguses that told other stories, and then they realized this was the little brother that wasn't supposed to be a king. That's how they found out.
There are several of them that are step pyramids, just like in America. Then the Egyptians started filling in the steps so that when you x-ray some of the pyramids, you can still see the steps, although you don't see it with the naked eye. If you x-ray some of them, you can see the steps, because the step is built to the core, because it more easily solves the problem of the ratio of run to rise in the building of that enormous thing. It's called the second of the pyramid in mathematics, so that it makes it easier to build a conical pyramid by putting the steps and then filling it up. It is true that as an idea or a concept moves from one continent to another, regardless of the nature of the influence, however profound, since natives are building it, not Africans, and Africans couldn't build Teotihuacan. Africans influenced the building. To build Teotihuacan must have taken more than 1 million people. There weren't 1 million Africans in America. So that you have native labor, that is people who are living here are building, but the ideas, engineering, even before they started to build, these guys worked it out like Washington, D.C. They have grid patterns, they have quadrants, they plan the whole city even before they start to put down the first brick. Obviously, you're not dealing with guys who had never entered urban worlds before, because there was no urban complex in all of.
I want to say, do you understand what he just said, right? So he's showing you, he's saying that it took millions of people to build these things, and they were not Africans, or what we would call the indigenous Africans. So we needed various. In the book Destruction of Black Civilization by William Chancellor, he was saying that he said, side note, I need the black people in America and Hispanics to investigate their connection to the land and the state of the Americas through the bloodline of the Moors, right? Because to be a Moor is to be mixed blood, right? See, understand the American black, his roots does not technically come. When we think of slavery, we take it from out of Africa. At that point, we just from out of America. So that's why we got all of these different stories. We got to start putting them together and trying to find truth and start looking at them, right? That's our job. So what's happening is this. Chief Warhorse, she dark-skinned, and she's saying when she helped the slaves is when the problem came, not when she helped the Europeans. When they helped the Europeans, it was no problem. When they started helping slaves, it was a problem. But I'm pretty sure they started helping the slaves because they couldn't help but to look at it like, damn, these people look like us. But at the same time, why did they? Because she said she was told the stories from her great-great-great-grandfather passed down. I'm not going to argue with Chief Warhorse. I got enough respect for her and her lie, and I take her information for what it is. And I take it into my mental psyche, and I appreciate it, and I put it in my library, right? Because then it's other things like when you say this, well, why is the mountains of the Grand Canyons, right? The Black Mountains. Why is everybody identifying with this darkness, right? This hue, this color. So that's why remember, they're searching for independency away from the American Negro and Black because of what we look like today. They don't want no association, right? And then that's why they already got the reservations of all of these things, right? But as you learn, they took their kids and made them learn new languages to dumb their mind down too. And then we got the Hispanic and the Mexican nations, they did the same thing, right? We know that if you know history, we know that the so-called Hispanics that we call Hispanics, they also lived in America too, in the area that we call Texas, right? Those areas that's really a part of Mexico still. Talking about building a fucking fence, and that's actually a part of their fucking country. We're invading part of America. It's taking a whole section out of their continent, technically, even though we know that the Americas are all one if you're educated. But they were pushed down. During the colonization, they were pushed back into Mexico. You see what Mexico look like now, right? At the time, there's a lot of desert. There's a lot of places, but if you don't know, there's a lot of tropics. Like the place. We always call Africa the jungle place. When they tell you we came from the jungle, no, the Hispanics come from the jungle. And our ancestors come from this jungle. There's more jungle in the Amazon than the rest of the world, period. And you got all of these civilizations that live when they say they got the money. We got billionaires, trillionaires who building shit going out of space. They got the money to go excavate South America. So let's stop using this excuse. The money exists. The money clearly exists. It exists, and the key is they stay away from it. They study it, but they stay away from it. And that's the key. That's my only argument to people of all nationalities and all the sense of when we talk about in America. Because he just said it. But remember, he just said, and I didn't want to get off course, that they were using, like, before there were structures there, they got proof of in America of like layouts using like dirt. It was dirt layouts. Like, this is like, imagine like they're sitting there and they're plotting. and they're looking and they're using dirt and they're building like little walls and squares and they're building the whole city before they're mapping the city before they fucking build it. So they put this square down mathematically. They put this triangle over here. Everything they need, they're going to draw and they're going to make it. They're going to use hills of dirt in straight lines or in corner, right? And they're going to show you, because the thing about it, they'll say, we're going to put the church here. We're going to put this here. That's architecture. And then after they go back and they put the stone on top of these areas, and now the only thing I got to do is build in the areas that are already carved out. It wasn't, we're going to bring the stone here, and no, they already had it. But where did they get the mindset? And that's the key, right? So that's what I thought was interesting. He's clearly saying over and over again that these people, there's people in America that's not African, meaning that they're not true Africans, meaning like the Nile Valley people, but they're people of Moorish descent that we would call it today, or dark skin or brown hue descent, as using their words.
America. Laventa was a great ceremonial city, yes, but real urban life begins at Teotihuacan. So here are these peasants going to sit down one day and say, let us build a city and let us work out all the structures exactly as the city could be worked out so that all of these lines are drawn in a certain way. That is exactly what happened. Only an elite who had the intimacy and familiarity with such structures could actually sit down and plan it out before they even start to lift the first brick. So what we're dealing with is conceptual diffusion, the diffusion of ideas, the diffusion of certain kinds of ideas from people who have been working in this for a long time. We're not talking about Africans building the pyramid. Consequently, therefore, when you see the pyramid in America, you see a different configuration. Superficially, it is different. But it has all, Teotihuacan has all three functions that the Egyptian pyramid has. It is a temple. It is a tomb. They have found skeletons inside of the rooms at Teotihuacan, and they haven't dug all of Teotihuacan up yet. There's still hidden temples, hidden passages, inside of Teotihuacan, and it functions as a geodetic marker. That base is not an accident. To build that base, you have to know all the astronomical knowledge Egyptians knew. You have to know the circumference of the earth. You have to know all the units of measurement which came out of the sky, the study of the sky, because we did not make the inch.
You know what I just realized that nobody talk about? We forget that everybody went to school in Egypt from all over the world. Before they want to tell us this, you know, today the mystery system in these ancient schools, everybody from all over the world went to school in Egypt or into these places, and some ancient schools was in America. We know that, right? But they had to go to these places to learn these building skills. The true question is, we got to figure out, because he said Egypt is here, yeah, but they called that Little Egypt. We can't say the Mississippi River is older than the Nile River, because we know it's not. That's the issue with that, though. Like, I'm a supporter that America could be the old world, but some of this stuff is a bit much, because the Nile River is natural. The Mississippi River was dug out to mimic the Nile. What does that tell you? To me, this is not that hard because of how I think and how I process, but people miss these points a lot during like when I'm learning and I'm watching this stuff and when I'm reading, I easily pick up things that they're not paying attention to.
The Africans did not make the inch by accident. They didn't get up one morning and somebody says, look, let me take my little finger, this is an inch. They didn't build a second of time by accident. The second of time was worked out by the relationship of the sun in its movement across the earth, the rotation on its axis, the rotation of the earth on its axis, all of those things, those are astronomical things. You cannot have units of measurement without astronomy. Mathematics and astronomy are related, just like geometry is related to the problems they solved in the inundation of the Nile. So all of these things were carried over. Why are they using units of measurement the Egyptians are using? Why, when you go to some of the burials, you find that...
I want you to think about what he just said. Certain mathematics came about because they had problems in the Nile with the flooding in the land. So they developed a system that is what we know as mathematics today that helped them solve the problems of the land. So that's how they came up with the inches and all of this, right? And then that's where they started with the construction. And this is what he's trying to say. So when the base of the pyramid in South America at Teotihuacan is the same as the base in Egypt, there's clearly a relationship here on some level. Like, stop thinking about people between rulers, because we don't realize how long we've been. Some people say we've been around 10, 20. No, we've been around millions of years, damn near. And at the least, like I say, 250,000. So we think about, you go millions, and then you think about how many years has passed, and empires are building, people go, royalty, all of this shit. And then you got multiple nations around the planet. This is, we got to understand by now that while they were ruling in Egypt, there was rulers going on in Mexico and in the Americas and in the Canadas and Alaska and Antarctica and in the Middle East. They weren't this. We make it seem like this civilization existed at this time and then it existed at this time. Like, no, there are a lot of these shits coexisted at the same time, and then some fell and arose in other places, right? And then some fell and arose in other places, but a lot of these places did coexist, and that's why I think it's important to say that the base of these pyramids are the same. So we constantly, in the argument of the guy, he was saying like, we was here. I think that's a dumb argument. And I was more confused because I'm thinking like, as black people, we always considered the Hispanics as us, right? So when I see like this, the will or want to be separated, but it was more like he wasn't separating us from them. He was separating the Africans from people from the continent of Africa from the dark-skinned people in America. Because his point was that it is true that we were mixed blood. You know what I'm saying? Even before anything, we are mixed. We're descendants of mixed people. That's why I keep telling you from my research, we're the descendants of the people from China and of the people of the Nile, the children of them that came to the Americas, right? So we keep arguing about stuff, but we just don't realize that we were here. We were everywhere. That's why every civilization on Earth, when they dig, they find out that the original Europeans were dark-skinned with dreads. You know what I'm saying? So I just always love to talk about this information.
Like in Egypt, you have canopic jars in the north, south, east, and west, and they have 4 distinct colors to mark the cardinal points. The Chinese have distinct colors to mark the cardinal points. They're not like the Egyptian. They are not like the Egyptian. No Asiatic color scheme marking the cardinal points are like the Egyptian, but the early Mexicans are doing it exactly like the Egyptian. How did they arrive at that color scheme? And later on they change it, but at that point of time of contact, they are using the identical color scheme of the 4 cardinal points. They came across the Bering Strait. They're Proto-Asiatic. Why are they not using Asiatic color scheme? Obviously an inference has come in. They have calendars. The Mexicans have more calendars than anybody else. Why, in addition to the 3 other calendars they introduced a 4th calendar, which is Egyptian, with the identical 365.25. They have their own counts, they've worked out their own native mathematics. Why then are they taking this into their system? All of these things have to be explained. Why at Elvia John in the Olmec world, in the heart of the Olmec world, there is paper found made from wood pulp. Nowhere on earth is paper made from wood pulp except among the Egyptians at this point in time. Why are they moving enormous stones which they never moved before from vast quarries, using the same method of breaking stone and linking it together, using the same methods of moving the stone as the Egyptians, bringing it down the swamps? Why is their agriculture identical as on the Nile? They're dealing with the same flood problems. Why they're responding in exactly the same way? They have the same hydraulic system of agriculture. You go down in Peru, which is touched by this, you see the terraced agriculture like in Egypt. Why are they doing all of these things? All their kings are carrying these things. They have the plume serpent motif. They have the great earrings under their ears. They have their beards as an index. of rank and royalty. They have the purple, the use of purple. Yesterday, for example, I caught our guide, Hector, saying that these things were painted red. I said, are you sure you mean red? He said, yes. I said, well, tell me what makes the red. What do they use to make red? He says, cochineal. I said, that's not red. Cochineal is the equivalent in the Mediterranean of the murex shell purple. Cochineal makes purple. All the temples in America, wherever they paint purple. They even painted the stone heads purple. Medinel Zenel found the patch of purple on one of the stone heads and found that the weathering of time, the erosion of the years, have taken the purple off the stone heads. That's the color they use in Egypt. That's the color they use in painting, when the main color used in painting temples is purple, because purple is emblematic of the power of the gods. And the reason why the Egyptians struck on that was by a peculiar arbitrary phenomenon, that the murex shell, before it reached its final fixed purple, went through a series of tints, which were like that of the Nile in flood. Now, most of you are city people who think that water is colorless or crystal. Water is not. This is only one kind of water. There is red water, there is blue water, there is green water, there is yellow water, there is brown water, there is silver water, there is crystal water, there is black water. All of these types of things, if you lived on rivers as I did, or you lived on the Nile as the Egyptians did, you will find water goes through many color changes. In fact, after a thunderstorm or a lightning storm, every color on earth, every color of the rainbow is on the water. And if you were accustomed, just like people who live among cattle, every cattle has a different color and marking. So that if you're accustomed your eye to cattle, you know that this is Jimmy and this is Johnny, etc. You don't mix the two things. You can tell one cattle from the other. We can't, because we are not cattle people. And most of us can't tell water color from another water color, because you're not water people. You don't live on rivers.
Hey, great point. See, remember, all ancient civilizations live by water, right? So he's saying we can't anymore, but let me tell you why this facts. Y'all know I got 9 dogs, bullies and bulldogs. So let me tell you, Hatshep and Remy look exactly alike. When I say exactly alike, they look exactly alike. Same face, everything, body. Now, if you know, because I know them, and even sometimes I gotta, and even though they minds and they older, like 4 and 3 and 5, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes I kind of double back, but I know, because when I stop second guessing myself, all I gotta do is use my eyes and realize, okay, Remy's a little more, right? But you know, weight fluctuates. So the difference is, even though they're the same color, the tint of them is a little different, right? Remy's a tad bit redder than Hatshep is. So if you, rather than sunlight in the house, I know, if anything, my marker is going to be, when I look at them side by side, whoever's redder, I know that that's Remy. You know what I'm saying? But their personalities are completely different. So also the other markers are the personalities. I could walk up to, when I walk up there, I wanted to have this before and say, hey, Remy, and she looked at me and walked off. So they know, right? So the cows, you'll get close to them in the personality. So it's a lot of markers. So he's just trying to get you to identify that if you live by water, we would master the water. We would be water people. Couldn't nobody tell us about water. If we live in the forest, we would be forest people. We lived in the jungles. If we lived on high mountains, we had mastered the environment to survive, right? So that's why when you take multiple people that move, rather if it's a group of people and they move to different places, and then 1,000 years later, we intermingle and come back and reintroduce ourselves, because really we family and know each other from somewhere down the line, and we come back up to each other, and now you got new knowledge. You got knowledge of the water. I got knowledge of the woods. You got knowledge of the jungle. I got knowledge of the deserts. Because if you notice, a lot of these places are similar in desert areas, or areas that's desert today that was tropical back then. So it's very powerful to understand that. And he's also giving you tools that you use when you're listening or watching or reading to understand because a lot of documentaries that tell you things about people or places and give you every detail of a people without telling you who they are, because you don't know the markers and the clues about them. You know what I mean?
And it is because of this that they were able to make a connection between the color scheme of the fluid in the Murex shell before it hit purple with the color scheme of the Nile and flood. And because it seemed identical to them, barring a tint or two, they concluded that the color purple was sacred because the Nile is sacred. That is why they worshipped it, and that is why common people could not use purple. I told you, for example, of the case of Margaret Hanke, who wrote a monograph recently on purple, in which she showed that purple became so important in the Mediterranean. Every European pope, every European king has a bit of purple taken from the Egyptians. They then took up purple. The Phoenicians ran up and down the Mediterranean with Tyrian purple. They destroyed all the ports that had the Murex shell until the Murex shell was exhausted. And some people say that the Phoenicians came over here with the Africans searching for purple. Cochineal, which is American, nowhere on earth is cochineal found. It has been found stamped on caves in North Africa. It doesn't belong to Africa. Barry Fell and his colleagues found cochineal, and it's been analyzed and examined, and they found it on some caves in North Africa. And the cost of purple was so great that 1 ell or yard of purple could be sold for nearly $1 million at a certain point in time. Only kings could buy purple. It was not the common people. All of these are things that seem to link up the old world with the new. The Olmec then go on, not only touching Teotihuacan, they seem to go on to touch other places. We saw Mitla yesterday. Mitla does not have very much to offer us because Mitla is almost razed to the ground. You saw the savagery with which the Spanish struck Mitla, so that our friend could tell us that 70% of the population were destroyed by the Europeans. 70% were destroyed by the Europeans within a matter of 50 years. And you find their temples razed to the ground. And I raised with him the question of something, the question which intrigues us is that there is a secret passageway at Mitla which has not been found since the 16th century, which was found by some of the Dominican priests, where they found an enormous burial and they closed it up, and it was never found again. There are lots of secrets at Mitla, but there again you find Olmec elite coming in, and then the Zapotecan and other people operating at Mitla. At Monte Alban, we have something very extraordinary occurring. Monte Alban seems to be evidence of an Olmec elite which landed in the place, and as building began in new ceremonial centers, they were sacrificed. They were overthrown, it seems, by the people, the Zapotec, the people who were in that area. What evidence do we have that these are not dancers? Because at first they said they were dancers, and recently they started this nonsense about hospital, that how these are sick people, that's why they look so strange. You note those people. First of all, their eyes are closed. They have a distorted pose and posture, and they're in a strange state, and their loins have been cut out in some cases. You can actually see the castration occurring. Now, I do not know of any sickness that causes people's testicles to fall out, because that is what they're presenting as a new theory now. This is a hospital at Monte Alban. That is why you have these figures. Do you know, we only saw a few of them, 140 of those types have been found at Monte Alban. And they indicate this extraordinary sacrifice that was made of ruling types. And for the first time, note, they said that at La Venta, we were not dealing with real people, we were dealing with babies and jaguars. Now they say at Monte Alban, these people have Olmecoid features. How can they have Olmecoid features when they're not? There's no such thing as Olmecoid features, because they say that the reason why these people have these peculiar kinds of faces at La Venta and those places is not because they're real people looking like that, but because they're representing the baby type or they're representing the jaguar type. Now they say they have Olmecoid features. What are Olmecoid features? The Afro-Asiatic, the strange face that begins in the Olmec world that touches Monte Alba, and there is the refold. Now that is not a happy note on which to end. Obviously, all great civilizations reach a certain point when they're either invaded from outside, they're struck by some tremendous cataclysm, or they become arrogant like the Aztec in later days, or the Europeans as they are becoming now, or have been for quite a while, but they're becoming more and more arrogant to a point where they may bring about, they may generate within their system a revolt that makes it impossible for them to operate with the kind of certitude with which they operate now. Most of you are filled with a sense of hopelessness when you think of the European giant, the tremendous shadow that he's thrown over the world. But let me tell you that changes have already begun to occur in the 20th century. When I was a boy, one of the things that was told to me repeatedly, in which I believed, is that the sun would never set on the British Empire. There was absolutely no way when I was growing up that anyone could be mad enough to imagine that Africa or the Caribbean would become independent. Now, I'm not saying they're independent, it's a paper independence, but it is a step in that direction. There is a measure of independence and movement away from the metropolitan power. It seemed utterly impossible for such a thing to occur in the world. The imperialist powers of France and England and Germany were so powerful that we did not for a moment believe that anything could happen. But there lay at the heart of the system certain contradictions that eventually exploded, so that the European himself, without the help of the African, began to destroy himself. After the war in Europe, it was impossible for European powers to maintain their hold in Africa and the Caribbean. Riots broke out everywhere. And the more riots that broke out in Africa, the more riots broke out elsewhere. I remember the only time I heard of anything about Africans that made me feel proud and that made me feel that I could identify with them was during the Mau Mau Rebellion, when the radio, which we listened to as if it were the Bible, the BBC, said that the British Army was closing in on an African who was the right-hand man to Kenyatta. I can't remember his name now, but he, Dedan Kimathi ran 40 miles on his toes to escape the pincer movement of the whole British Army in Kenya and jumped away from them. That was the first time in my life that I heard of an African different from what I had heard of in Tarzan. That is the first time I began to think that perhaps we were dealing with something else other than what I had been told. It was just a flicker. It was to come later, for example, when books started suddenly to arrive from Russia in English about the revolutions in Africa, and they tried to seize these books, but they couldn't find them. We passed them on fast. So the tide in the movement began and could not be stopped, because suddenly, with almost a religious fervor, peoples all over the world began to become conscious of themselves as having the power to change things. That was all. They did not have guns, they did not have bombs. Everything was against them, but they had a new moral force. A new moral force that came out of a contact not as profound as ours today, but a contact, however flickering, however faint, of another kind of history, of another kind of person. Suddenly, as if what had been buried for centuries in history began to resurrect itself, creating a new sense of person. I was talking today with someone, and this is something that has been raised constantly by students as one travels around the country. Why is it important to talk about what blacks did in America 3,000 years ago, or in Africa, 3,000, 2,000, 1,000 years ago. What does it matter? The black man is reduced throughout the world. So to talk about what he did or didn't do in ancient times is irrelevant. That is not true. That is not true because of the fact that this consciousness is where change begins. Consciousness is the beginning of a new man, beginning of force. It is like putting a plug into ancient source of electricity. Something actually happens. One begins invaded with a new energy. I always remember that there are circuits of energy in the human. Energy has nothing to do with how much food you eat or what is your native constitution. Gandhi had more energy than anybody who was weightlifting. Gandhi could walk into England with his loincloth and sit in the snow without feeling cold. That is energy. It's a different kind of energy. Energy, Gandhi acquired a peculiar kind of energy because he was plugging into something that was different from what the Indian had plugged into for a long time under the British. A different conception of freedom and power and dignity. When Gandhi sat at that table and the British said, "Of course, you don't expect we are going to leave this place, do you?" And Gandhi said, "Yes, you're going to leave this place," with an absolute confidence, because he knew from the shift in consciousness that there was no way that the British could move against the tide that was rising in the consciousness of the Indian people. They were going back to a sense of what they were. They were no longer thinking of themselves as mere extensions of that civilization. That is why we go back into history, because history, its resurrection, its reconstruction, produces different qualities in the human. It is almost like a religious energy and fervor and zeal that rises in consciousness and reshapes the people. That is why one goes back, because it really affects the living present. Our conception of the world, our consciousness of what is happening is determined by our conception of history. If you think your history starts with slavery, as most black Americans do still, and most whites still do, and Alex Haley's roots didn't change it, merely consolidated it. If you think that history begins with slavery or with primitives in the jungle, there is absolutely no way that you can speak with confidence that you can overturn a civilization, because at the root, regardless of any protest that may spring superficially from your mouth, at the very center of your being, there's an absolute conviction that you're dealing with people who are essentially superior in every way. They only cease to be essentially superior when you rediscover through your history that it is not so. That fundamentally there are large extent invaders who struck as barbarian forces other peoples, captured them, and destroyed not only their cities and their civilizations, but sought systematically, as they still do, to destroy their conception of themselves as people. It is only then through that history, whether it be in Mexico or in Egypt, the recovery of this, when one sees that one is at the very center of formative civilization. Olmec was formative. It wasn't just something it wasn't just something flowering at La Venta, Tres Zapotes, San Lorenzo and Veracruz. It was to touch Mitla, it was to touch Monte Alban, it was to touch Teotihuacan, it was to touch Tlatelolco, all the great centers. It was even to go right down into South America so that it touched Chavin, Kupisnik civilization in South America. And we were involved in it. And Egypt was not just Cairo and the Sudan. Egypt touched Europe. The Greek would not have been possible without Egypt. Asia and its great quantum leaps would not have been possible without Egypt. That Nile Valley carried a fire into Europe, a fire into Asia, right through the world. We were there at the heart of that. And it happened.
It is. I'm glad to be back here again, Jim. It's been quite a while. Yes, it's been a while, too long. Before we actually get to you, though, we need to really lay a proper groundwork for the content of this program. It needs to be known just who the three critics of Professor Van Sertimer are. Bernard de Montellano of Michigan, Warren Barbour, the University of Buffalo, and Gabriel Haslip Vieira, Acting Director of Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. The last two of whom, Warren Barbour and Gabriel Haslip Vieira, were invited to appear, as I said in the introduction of this program, to appear on the program to face Professor Van Sertimer, and they declined. I got Professor Haslip Vieira on the telephone earlier this week and really pressured him and tried to get him to appear, but he said he really couldn't. And so I asked him if he would fax me then a sort of an overview or a summary of his critiques of Professor Van Sertimer. He said that he would. But the next day I got a fax letter, and I think in all fairness, because of the sensitivity of this issue, you should hear the letter verbatim. Dear Mr. Noble, after our conversation yesterday, I came to the conclusion that you were right about the best way to handle a program that deals with Ivan Van Sertimer and his work. A face-to-face discussion between Van Sertimer and one of his critics is the best way, parentheses, the only way, to deal with his many claims, all of them unsupported by the environmental, historical, and archaeological evidence. Van Sertimer makes assertions about pyramids, ocean currents, terracotta figurines, the distribution of plants, the introduction of African words, and the introduction of religious and political concepts, among other claims. He also plays games with linguistics and with racial stereotypes, for example, hair braids, and, parentheses of course, the colossal stone heads with their presumed Negroid features. All of these claims need to be responded to individually, point by point. There is no other way. Unfortunately, I cannot be present on your show. I also believe that a faxed summary of our critique would be woefully inadequate to deal with the seriousness and complexity of this subject. I guess Van Sertimer will simply get a free ride, but that's okay because our critique is now in print and available to our main constituents, students, teachers, and public schools, as well as faculty institutions of higher learning. Again, I want to thank you for the invitation, and please accept my profound regrets. Sincerely, and best wishes, Gabriel Haslip Vieira, Ph.D., Acting Director of Puerto Rican Studies at Hunter College. Having said that, once again, I welcome you to the program. Good to be here. And you heard some of the things that he mentioned, Professor Dr. Haslip Vieira has mentioned in his letter of declining to appear. And let's get your overall response to what he has said here in this letter and what you are aware he and his two other colleagues have said in critique of your work. This is a cowardly way out and an easy way out for them, because they submitted to me a 55-page document. They allowed me 800 words to reply. I insisted that that is nonsense. Eventually agreed with the editor, Richard Fox, that I would be allowed 15 pages against their 55. When I did my 15 pages, which even the editor points out was a detailed response, I asked, could I publish this after I publish it with you? He said, yes, of course, once we publish it first. Fortunately, I was advised by my lawyer not to trust him just as well, because when I asked him to put it in writing that I could republish my response, he said, no, you cannot do that unless you publish the 55-page attack on you. In other words, to publish my 15 pages, I had to publish the 55. These three individuals collaborated on an article that was circulated to hundreds of subscribers of a periodical called Current Anthropology. Yes. And the article that they co-authored is called Van Sertimer's Afrocentricity and the Olmec. Yes, that was their way out, to just dub all of this evidence as Afrocentricity. If this is Afrocentricity, Columbus was an Afrocentric. Because as I pointed out in July 1989, I was invited to speak before.
Tell you all like this. He's responding to the guy You see how I was able to find this? This is Ivan Van Sertima responding to the report that the guy's reading who's making all of these claims about him. Remember what we was going through the last couple of days? The report that guy made about Ivan Van Sertima, when that report he was reading about that they're using their claims right now, and like a lot of Hispanics using those claims, that the people that wrote that paper submitted the 55-page document to Ivan Van Sertima, and then told him that he can only respond with a certain amount of words. And then he argued, and then Van Sertima is basically saying, like, he said, well, after we're done, I'm gonna publish mine. So I'm gonna publish it like the worst. So it's proof that I'm not BSing. And so they supposed to sit down and have a debate, and they wrote and said, oh, sorry, we're not gonna show up. So remember, and I hope that guy see me that debated his work, because he was using the same work that he was using as his basis. These people refuse to sit down on a national television and go back and forth with Van Sertima. So this is the answer to the people that wrote that paper, right?
For a congressional committee, because they found I was interfering with Christopher Columbus quincentenary celebration. As I pointed out to that committee, I'm not the first person to suggest there were Africans in America before Columbus. Christopher Columbus is the first person to say that. He actually says in the journal of his second voyage that when he was in Haiti, Native Americans came to them and told them that black-skinned people had come from the south and southeast trading in gold-tipped spears. Columbus may or may not have believed, but he actually sent these spears back to Spain to be assayed. They were meticulously examined in Spain. They were found to be identical with spears then being forged in African Guinea. Of 32 parts, 18 were of gold, 6 of silver, and 8 of copper. Not only were they identical metallurgically, the words that the Americans were found to be using for these spears, which they claimed to come from black people, the Africans were using these same words. Ghana, for example, was the name of one of their great medieval places. And Ghana was one of the words they used for gold as well. That was one of the words for spear. Listen closely to the parallels. Ghana, Kane, Kani, Ganin, Ganin. And in the Caribbean, where there was a report that these people had landed before Columbus, they have Guana, Kana, Gani, Ganin, Ganini. They actually use the word Ganini to refer to the black gold merchants. Now, at our request, you have brought some 22 slides. And in our next segment, we want to begin to look at those slides that you have offered to us to support your contention. You have been arguing about the African presence, at least in this hemisphere, for a long time. Oh, yeah. This is not a new argument. I have spent 27 years of my life on this. These guys have spent about 27 days pulling together their little stuff, attacking me, and I could hit everything they say down. All right. We'll see if you can live up to that. But we need to take a break, Professor Van Sertima. We'll be back with this struggle after this.
I gotta show y'all this. Look at I realized looking at this guy, when you see George Washington and them presidents, I want to show you.
They actually use the word Ghanini. Years of my life on the back.
Don't he look like one of the pictures on a dollar bill? I want y'all to think right now. Think about the face of George Washington, the nose, the lips, the hair. And then understand how much history they hide. He looks just like George Washington. But just the imagery of it and how easy you could take this same still frame and put on a dollar, and if I change the color, he looks like he's a European. And I thought that was interesting. It just hit me just looking at it.
With this struggle after this. Since you came out with your writings about the African presence, at least that part which deals with this hemisphere, was it always under attack, or are these attacks and critiques recent? There was an attack at first. Glenn Daniel was invited from Britain to attack me. They wouldn't allow any American professors to comment. Eventually, however, the first man to go out in the field, Matthew Sterling was to be the first, but this Dr. Clarence Wines went out to the field and found these stone heads. And he was the first to write a letter to the New York Times about me, saying that he's, after 40 years in archaeology, he's absolutely convinced of the soundness of my conclusion. All right. Now, what are we going to be looking at now?
What are we going to be looking
at? This segment, we're going to look at 6 of the 22 that you've sent us.
Yes, this is the journey that was made from the medieval empire of Mali, 1310 and 1311. And I want very quickly to go over 12 categories of evidence to show that this was not a fiction, that the evidence exists there. Not only...
What is this map based on?
This map shows you the empire of Mali in the 14th century, and there's evidence in 12 categories showing that people from Mali made 2 journeys to America. One was in 1310. One captain came back. He said he found the Valent River in the middle of the sea, which would be off Brazil.
How were these, was this map done? And who did it?
No, this is a map of Mali drawn in current times, but it relates to earlier maps, early Arab maps of Mali, showing what Mali looked like. It was as large, said the Arabs, as all the states of Western Europe put together. It wasn't an Arab empire, but the Arabs visited it.
All right, very quickly, because we have a lot of ground to cover. What are the 12 points that you need to mention?
Okay, I give you a dozen Europeans who actually saw or heard of these blacks when they came. I want to name them. I'll deal with methodological evidence that I've already dealt with methodological evidence and linguistic evidence. I'll deal with some botanical evidence, oceanographic evidence, navigational evidence, skeletal evidence, epigraphic evidence, that is a script, cartographic evidence, that's a map, oral and documented evidence, and iconographic evidence, that is images of these people at that point in time in America.
All of these you have documented?
Yes, all of these are documented. There's never any event in history that has 12 categories of evidence and it didn't happen.
All right. Let's go to the second slide.
Okay.
All right. What are we looking at now?
These are the currents, okay, that move.
The oceanographic currents?
Yes, that move from Africa to America. They're like marine conveyor belts. Once you're caught in these currents, you have to come to America.
Oh, so that is what facilitated
facilitated the movement.
All right.
But I think that it is very important that I do mention the people who saw blacks when they came, Europeans.
Right.
Ferdinand, Columbus saw them. Columbus saw them. He heard of them in Haiti, but he saw them north of Honduras. He reports that to his son Ferdinand. Vasco Núñez de Balboa, September 25th, 1513, saw 2 tall Africans among the Native Americans in Panama.
All right.
And Peter Martyr comments on them, Lopez de Gamara, Rodrigo de Colmenares, black, east of the Gulf of San Miguel. Alphonse de Catafax presents us with a map by a French Captain Corhale that shows us independent black settlements in Brazil, in Florida, and in St. Vincent. L'Abbé Brassou de Bourbourg comes to Panama, studies, and finds that there are 2 people native to Panama, indigenous to Panama, the Native Americans, red-skinned people, the Tule, and the Mandinga, the black-skinned people. All of these people mention black.
All right. Let me intrude because we do have a paucity of time that we're faced with. This is the slide that shows Kontiki.
Yes. No, this is Hayadal found that Africans could build boats even before Christ. Okay, even before Christ. This is
he made
Ra
a replica.
One. This is not Kontiki. This is Ra 1.
Oh, Ra.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, and it was built by the Baduma people on Lake Chad, and it crossed the Atlantic successfully.
Okay. And we know that story. It's pretty well known.
There are also other journeys, but we come now to the evidence like this, which shows you on the right side is a Mexican. The very black one is the Mexican is found at Teotihuacan.
And on the left?
And on the left is an African woman. To show you
the similarity,
the head kerchief, the earrings, as well as the face.
The same analogy is being drawn here?
So here now, no. The one with the turban and the scarification, that's an African too. It's a vivid scarification.
That's on the left.
Yeah.
And on the right?
And on the right, there is a black man found in Mexico that is sculptured, and he was worshipped as the god Tezcatlipoca. It was not African, it's a Mexican. But he was worshipped because of he had the right ceremonial color.
This?
And that is a Mandingo head found at Oaxaca among the Mixtecs.
And in the lower right hand?
That's another head.
All right. And lastly, I think we have one more slide to look at.
No, this is a totally
This is another segment? All right.
Different segment.
Pardon my impetuosity, but in the interest of time...
Yes, I know you have a limited time, but there's...
Limited time and paucity of training on my part. But we'll take...
of evidence.
Let me interrupt you. We need to take a break, and the struggle will continue for our knowledge. Struggle continues. What plates are we going to look at now? Let's take a look at the first plate and see where we are.
Now, if you see the whole plate, that is...
I feel like if you pay attention, that they're kind of like, they're discrediting him. Even like on TV, the guy is really not giving him time to explain himself. Why? See, when you start to really pay attention on a deeper spiritual level, they brought him up there, but he's showing slides, but they're really not giving him time to explain it. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how you know it's deeper than they're allowing him there because he showed up and it's like the other person didn't. And I'm not knocking dude, but he's clearly rushing him and not allowing him to articulate not just time, but even the way he's going about it.
Just half. But the Egyptian is first in the world. This is 1,200 years before Christ, and they show him as first in the world. The second is the Indo-Aryan, and then there are two more in this same plate. It shows the Nubian, exactly like the Egyptian at this time, very Africoid, with the same costume. It's just that he has two banners of power while the Egyptian has three, and then comes the Semite. That shows you the state of the world at that time.
All right.
The Egyptian had a myth about seven.
Wait, we go to the next slide.
Yes. All right. The reason I have to say something about seven before you see this, because you will see the extraordinary.
Well, we'll keep it up. We'll keep it up while you talk.
Okay, but this is one of the stone heads that appear in America. Some of them are Native American, but quite a number of them are so Africoid. They're distinct from the Native American. They've been explained away in all sorts of ways. They said they're jaguars, half human, half jaguars. That's why they look like that. They're baby faces. They're ball players. They're divine beings. But that's the side of that head. And now look at the back of the head.
These are heads that were
found in Mexico before Christ. And the circa 1200 BC, the same time, you have evidence of the Egyptians making a journey to what they call the underworld in the West.
And there's a contention.
Now, here is the seven braided. Now, this is very important because that's their hallmark, seven. The Egyptians gave us a 7-day week. They also believe seven was important in the ages of man, 7 pure reason, 14 fruit received, 21 maturation, 7 deadly sins, 7 cardinal virtues, 7 orifices in the human body, 7 layers of skin, 7 primary colors.
We're looking
and
at
here we
braided
have
hair. On
7 braids.
Okay.
And my critics are saying that Africans never braided their hair. Europeans did. Africans never braided their hair until they were colonized.
Okay.
Now here shows you an
on
African.
The left is a photograph of an African.
Yes.
From
and
where?
On the right.
From where?
From Kenya. And on the right is the one of the stone head.
Now, you mean to tell me that your critics are contending that this stone head on the right is not a rendering of somebody who came from Africa?
Yes. No, they say it's a spitting image of the natives. They say they wear jaguars. They say they're ball players. They say they're baby faces.
What do you mean when you say jaguar? What did they mean when they say
said
jaguar?
That it's half human, half jaguar, because since
the more I listen to this conversation, I've seen him interview many people. I don't think he's one of us, but I don't think he means it. But he's definitely got to keep time, and that's where the Russian is coming from. But he's saying, like, I can't believe they're arguing with you, because what they're saying, like that guy that study is saying that the guy on the left, he's a guy from Africa for sure, like Nigeria or whatever. And look at that head, right? If they're carving his face, and look at the nose, right? Look at the nostrils. And they're saying, like, no, this carving is this indigenous Hispanic or Mexican from the area that was dark skinned that had nothing to do with Africans. That's the argument. That's what I've been saying the last day or so.
Olmec had a passion about the jaguar. They linked the jaguar with the human, which is absurd because the graves show the skulls and skeletons of Africans, not of jaguars.
Let's move forward.
Here now you see a very unusual thing. that you have a flap falling along the face, a circle air plug, parallel incise lines, identical helmet appears in Egypt, Egypto-Nubia in this period 1200.
Right, let's take a look at the next one.
Okay, that's what they say represents all the stone heads. They say that's Native American and all the stone heads look like that.
All right. Next.
Now, that's the Weir Jaguar. They say all the stone heads look like that, the Weir Jaguar. Just want to show you how ridiculous this is. But it's very important at this point that you should become aware of the fact that two craniologists have actually been in the grave near where these skeletons are and found clear evidence of African type. Clear evidence of African type. There's no question about it. They have actually examined all of this, and they've shown the skeletal evidence to be clearly that here are Native Americans. The majority of people in the grave are Native Americans, and there is a type that is distinct from the native, with all the elements that you associate with African. If you found it anywhere else in the world, you would say these are Africans. So none of these explanations about babies and Weir Jaguars, there are no babies or Weir Jaguars or divine beings in the grave. There are Africoid types. 13.5%, that's Latilco, Serra de las Misas, and Monte Alban are found in the grave, 13.5%, and then they start intermarrying with the women and it drops to 4.5% over a number of decades.
So your thesis is that the Africans took advantage of these currents in the Atlantic Ocean and used boats such as what we saw, the Ra recreation, and came to this hemisphere long before Columbus.
Yes, but the Mandingo journeys are quite distinct from that of the time in the Ramesses III, because you have a clear evidence that they sent out 7 ships. It's in the tomb of the Ramesses that they sent out 7 ships, and the Americans report 7 ships arriving. The Popol Vuh, the Bible of the Quiche Mai reports 7 ships arriving in harbor, and these strangers arriving.
Do you have any evidence of what kind of impact the African arrival had on this hemisphere?
Well, we have, as I say, evidence about the 7 ships, Champolio, Lefebvre, Rosselini, Sahagun, a whole range of people coming since on this. And the impact...
Was it hostile or peaceful?
No, it was not hostile. It was peaceful. There are later incidents between Africans and Native Americans. We have one case in which the Native Americans actually make a chief out of an African. I have a picture of that, them sitting together, not only in harmony, but an African chief being made a chief by the Native Americans. But in this period, we have no evidence of any hostility, but we have evidence of an influence. Wherever there is a contact, there is an influence. And we have evidence of 12, I have defined 12 rituals which are identical as in Egypt. They're extremely complex. They have clear antecedents in Egypt, and they suddenly begin to appear during this contact period.
Is there any evidence of any colonial activities on the part of the Africans? Was there to colonize parts of...
No evidence of that. You have an evidence of these people coming. You have an evidence of a specific contact. We don't have any evidence of colonization. They were not colonized. And I never claimed that they created the Olmec civilization, as my critics say. I said they influenced it. Because once you have a contact, certain influences would come in. That is true of all civilizations. Once there is a contact, certain things come in. You don't have to dominate the society in order to influence it. That is absurd.
All right. But the reality is that we have to take another break. We'll be back. 4 plates to look at in this segment. Practice the same.
The Egyptians and the Egypto-Nubian world. Here it appears among the Olmecs. They're wearing 2 crowns and they have the bird and the serpent. The reason why you have the bird and the serpent in Egypt, the bird represents the upper world, the serpent the lower world.
I've seen that.
And they assume they control both. This is another, the bird bath from Egypt. Here you find him in Mexico. He's flying out of a hole in the sarcophagus, the tomb, flying out with his human head. That's the identical ritual. Next. And here are 2 gods from Egypt on the left, 2 gods pouring cross streams over a 3rd god, that ceremony. And the same thing in Mexico, where you see 2 gods, 2 Mexican gods pouring cross streams over a black god.
Right. And lastly,
so this is the god Sokar. standing in Egypt. He stands in the back of a snake which has a head at the head and a head at the tail, and he's holding up his wings. The identical thing appears in Mexico. Now, I've only, because of the brevity of the program, I'm only showing 4 out of 14. Science demands 8.
All right.
Proof of contact, I've shown 14.
All right. Let me ask you a couple of things. Did the culture in this hemisphere practice the same entombing process that we are familiar with in Egypt? Was that something that they adopted here? Do we have evidence of mummies and sarcophagus?
We have evidence of mummies, but it is quite possible in Mexico at least that some of them, they had their own process of mummification. In Peru, however, we have identical, not just identical substances, but identical formula. That when we come to touch in South America towards the end, I will deal with that.
Now, what about pyramid building?
Pyramid building, Bart Jordan, a child prodigy to whom Einstein granted special audience, has done a tremendous work on correspondences between certain Egyptian pyramids and certain American pyramids. That does not mean Egyptians taught the Americans to build pyramids, nor that they built the pyramids. I never said that. I said there are certain influences, there are certain aspects, and there are certain pyramids. There he shows in my new book, Early America Revisited, he has contributed essays on the pyramids, which shows extremely complex relationships and correspondences which could not happen twice.
Were they on the same sophisticated level as the pyramids that we are familiar with in Egypt, with the passageways?
Well, they were not yet. There, some of them do. They're not as large, as elaborate as the Egyptian pyramids, but we do have some which have aspects that are quite extraordinary in terms of their correspondence with what you find in Egypt.
So I guess the question is, in lay terms, how does one, looking at this history, delineate between what was brought from Africa that we see the remains of in this hemisphere, and what was evolved by the indigenous people?
Okay, you can easily tell that through antecedents. The question of looking at antecedents, if you find something here for thousands of years or centuries, and then you look over here and you cannot find evidence of it before you may find pyramid building, of course, but you'd come upon a certain type of pyramid built in a certain way. Okay, that's the situation.
How about writings on walls? Are there any evidences of writings on the walls?
Rafik Darazboy has cited this at Potrero Nueva. I have not seen it, of hieroglyphs. And the Smithsonian, of all places, mentioned in April the 5th, 1909, it is mentioned in the Phoenix Gazette that they found a cave somewhere in America, and they actually cordoned it off so that nobody could come into this cave. And they said they found Egyptian-type hieroglyphs, and they found evidence of certain things suggesting a movement of people at the time of Ramses, some journey at the time of the Ramses. And Professor Jordan was in charge of the Smithsonian institution search at that time, and not a word. 90-something years have passed, and not a word more about it.
The Africans that first came to this hemisphere, did they land in what we now call the Caribbean, or in Central America?
They landed in the Gulf of Mexico. The currents take you into the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the currents could take you into the Caribbean, but they landed in the Gulf of Mexico. That is what evidence we have.
There was no...
Because the 7 ships, you see, that's something I must say something about. 7 was critical. That's why the 7 braids is critical, because the Egyptians sent out 7 ships. The Americans report 7 ships arriving, and 7 was critical to the whole mythology of the Egyptians.
Did they have the same calendar? Did they have the same math? Are there any analogies between the African calendar or the numerical
system? The Americans had their own calendar. Americans had their own calendar.
I see. Yes. All right. I think that we ought to take a break and gear up for the remaining segments that we have. And when we come back, we'll press on with this most absorbing and, I must say, challenging discussion with Professor Ivan Sertiman. Stay with us. Set of plates are upon us, the last 4. Now, these you have identified in the notes you've given me covering South America.
Yes.
Let's take a look at them.
Now, this is a very important map because recently scientists discovered South American cocaine in 7 ancient Egyptian mummies.
Well, this is kind of muddled, to be honest with you. How, you know, what is it really?
On the right is the outlines of West Africa, the West African coast.
See.
And on the left is the outline of the South American coast.
And what are those sunburst lines in the middle there?
Well, these are some kind of measurement system, but what it indicates, what it has been established, that this map has accurate latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates between the African Atlantic coast and the South American Atlantic coast. Nobody could have drawn this map at the time of Columbus. They did not know, not until between 1492 and 1744, until the chronometer was invented, nobody could have drawn this map.
So when do you contend this was drawn?
No, we don't contend. We know for a fact this was pre-Christian Egypt. They have found this in a pre-Christian context. It was found by a Turkish admiral in Egypt, Loive, and it has been established this is a pre-Christian map.
And this is, but you're saying that Columbus didn't have the wherewithal to do a map of this caliber.
No, at the time of Columbus, you could not possibly draw such a map. Let me just point to 4 little things quickly in this map that could not have been done at the time. Andes is shown in this map. It was not discovered until 1527 by Pizarro. Then we have the Trith River in Colombia is shown for distance of 300 miles. Nobody knew about that. The Amazon River is shown the actual course of the river. In contrast, even in the 16th century, European maps show no resemblance to rail
All right.
course. That's just a few feet.
Let's move forward. Yes.
Now, here is the Peruvian. This is an African type found in Peru.
This is a rendering of a head that was found in Peru.
Yes.
Okay. And the next?
That's another sculpture.
Found in Peru.
Yes. The Colombian. This is another one.
One would say that looked like a brother.
Yes. Well, my critics would say it's impossible that it could be a brother because brothers do not cross oceans until they're taught by Europeans. There's a total racist thing. They actually said, Haslevera and de Montellano said that Native Americans would have sacrificed and eaten Africans if they came. And they go so far as to say they totally ignorant of the ancient Egyptians. They said all Egyptians have long, narrow, Egyptians and Nubians have long, narrow noses. Broad, flat noses are confined to the ancestors of African Americans.
All right. Let me just talk to you straight up about what this may all be about in your estimation. Is this really an attempt to sort of put a particular spin on history that may validate some people and invalidate other people?
Well, in my case, I am beyond that. Okay, there are some writers on Africa who try to present perhaps some fantasies or fiction about Africans. I am not concerned with that. Okay, I'm concerned with finding out the truth about Africa, and the evidence here is indisputable. It is utterly indisputable because these maps have been studied. It is very clear that the facts presented here cannot be refuted. What they are doing is just dismissing it. For example, I presented 12 categories of evidence in the Mandingo case. I didn't get a chance to mention it on this program because of the lack of time. 12 categories of evidence. All they have to say, they dismiss it in one sentence. There's absolutely no evidence. They don't argue with any of it. They don't disprove any of it.
Have you had an opportunity to confront and debate with your
I debated with one of them, Warren Barbour. There's an article in one of the Buffalo newspapers, Van Sertima wins by a knockout. And with regard to de Montellano, who is another one of my critics, he'd been circulating secretly things against me in the Michigan schools. Some of my books were withdrawn from the schools until eventually some honest teacher passed it on to me. And then I got a chance to reply, mumbling to de Montellano.
Is the friction that you've been getting confined to these three individuals?
No. Haslevera, I don't know at all. They are concerned. They are concerned to present. This is not just in current anthropology. Quite a number of magazines have been issued recently with attacks on me by these three gentlemen. They've joined, and it's a trio of critics who have joined together. I respond to all of this criticism in my new book, Early America Revisited, which has a vast body of new evidence. It doesn't just restrict itself with what I knew and they came before Columbus.
Have they done an analogous amount of writing on their own, any of these three
Oh, no,
critics?
they are totally unknown. This is their chance to...
They have no books that they've written?
None of them, as far as I know, have written any books. This is their chance. They come together, and their total concern and attack has been on me.
Well, someone on the street might say, Professor Van Sertima, if these are relative unknowns, they haven't written a book, and they just put this in a periodical, why are you so upset about something that you should be able to brush away?
The reason is because thousands of dollars, I presume it may even be $1 million being spent on this. This attack on me is being circulated to hundreds of schools and universities.
And it is being adopted by...
It's being read, and because they do not have the counter evidence, because they do not have the counter, they accept this as these are Van Sertima is lying, this is not a valid history, etc. This is Afrocentricity. They actually call it Van Sertima's Afrocentricity in the Olmec.
Last break. Last segment coming right up. Stay with us, please. What would be the best way to have an honest, useful discourse and discussion about these differing opinions? What would be the best arena? In a lecture process, in the written word? What would be the best theme where this discussion could really benefit everybody who saw and heard it?
Well, you see, I have had a debate with one of these people, Warren Barbour.
You told me that.
Okay, but there is no... they limited me, for example, to 45 minutes.
You've mentioned that.
Yes.
But what would be your ideal? Because maybe we can, play a role in bringing the three of them to face you.
I wouldn't like to face all three of them together. I would like to have my colleagues with me. Okay? No three against one, because that's exactly what they do with current anthropology. They limit me to a certain amount of time, and they hog the time, they hog the pages, etc.
So it would be
that does not give me, therefore, yes. Who would
the other two be?
Okay, one of them would be Dr. Finch. Okay. Dr. Finch is in Atlanta.
And who would the other be?
Yes, I will name the other, because I have a number of names in mind. I would rather name that at a later date.
Should this be done on television?
Yes.
Or should this be done in some sort of an academic
whatever
arena?
Public forum there could be? Because I remember when I had to face Barbour, I was limited to 45 minutes.
I understand.
Okay, and that, you see, that is very unfair, because it meant that he could lay a whole attack on me, presenting no hard evidence on his part. They don't have to present evidence; they just have to attack. Well, when I'm limited to a certain amount of time to respond, which is not fair. It means, therefore, I merely appear to be responding rather than presenting the evidence, because there's a massive amount of evidence which I could not even begin to mention here because of the limited time.
Is this unusual, or doesn't this happen frequently between historians who have differing perspectives of history?
No, I think I have seen some fair debates where people have had an opportunity to present all the facts. I have seen that in various debates. But there's a limited amount of time, and you would have a situation in which you cannot present evidence. Take, for example, I could say in closing, they found 2 African skeletons in the West Indies, in a grave before Columbus, dated 1250 AD. The Smithsonian itself said that they're morphologically African. They said there was a filing of incisive teeth which was restricted to certain Atlantic Africans in the pre-Columbian period. But then they went to carbon date them, they found they could not. So they had to date them stratigraphically. That is the layer in which they were found. They found the Native American ornament around the forearm of one of the skeletons. And they found other kinds of evidence showing that these are pre-Columbian Africans.
Let's open up a chapter for our young viewers who perhaps have not heard this discussion at all, except for perhaps the mention of Christopher Columbus. What would you recommend to a youngster in their reading to really begin to get into this whole discussion and to understand what the implications are of whether one version is told or another?
Okay, the most important reading would be my new book, Early America Revisited, because I have done that in the light of a vast amount of new evidence, and I have made it in such a way that any student can understand.
Are there writings that offer a different perspective that you would recommend that a student read to balance off against yours, or are you just saying just read mine and that's the truth?
No, I think if something is a fact and it is supported by 12 categories of evidence, you don't come and say, read so-and-so, okay, who shows that these skeletons were not found when the skeletons are found. They have to fight their own battle.
Are there other readings that you would recommend that support and show other dimensions of your thesis?
It's important to read Dr. Finch's new book, Star of Deep Beginnings, because like my book, Blacks in Science, he shows you the levels Africans reached in various places, whereas they dismissed just as primitives in the jungle. That's why it becomes so difficult to believe that they could cross oceans like other people, so difficult to believe that they could influence any other civilization. One is not trying to establish some superiority of the African. One is trying to establish that there are many fictions, and we have thousands of books filled with these fictions, and we cannot change that where we have to fight 3 professors, and yet when you fight them and you show all the kinds of lies they have made, then you have a situation in which you have to give them equal time. And then when you give them equal time, they refuse to pair.
Well, in a fair presentation of an issue, it is always helpful to at least suggest what the critic is.
Oh, yes.
Before we hear the response to the criticism. For a young person concerned about that, why should a young person go outside of their normal curriculum and pursue this? You're suggesting that this is very important.
Yes.
And this is something that is important for the soul as well as the mind. In what way?
Well, it is important because lots of people behave as inferiors because they've come to believe they are inferior. The history does more than anything else. False history does more than anything else to create that. I was at London University, and at the end of the first year, I went to study Africa. That was a big mistake. At the end of the first year, I tried to commit suicide.
What?
Yes, I drank poison. The doctors, I was unconscious because everything that I was taught made it quite clear to me that all Africans were primitive. Most of them lived in the jungle. They never had any inventions, any science, etc. This was pounded into me day and day. And yet, coming out of that coma, I decided I will never be the same person again. I have to find for myself, create for myself another world. I have to find out what really happened in Africa. That was the beginning of a new life for me. For example, in spite of the fact that my professors were all doctors of law and language, they had worked for several years on a Swahili dictionary. I ended up compiling the dictionary. They would not go to the sources, the primary sources. I actually entered the court in Tanzania, went and studied the documents, quoted from the documents. They sat in their little palaces writing about Swahili law. I actually went and got the primary documents. So that is very important.
So in excavating this dimension of history has really helped you find self.
Yes, indeed.
And your own definition of who you are, and also understanding what the world is all about.
And it didn't come from any Afrocentric vision. Man is man is man. I don't believe in inferior, superior people. It was an attempt to find out what lay behind the falsehoods of history. Those things that were being taught us that were constantly destroying us and reducing us.
Professor Van Sertima, this has been absorbing, challenging, stimulating, and I thank you. And maybe we can get something going on in the future. Maybe I can find a way to corral and control the use of these slides. But I hope you'll agree